How's it going, everyone? So we just kicked off the hackathon today, and with the kickoff, I want to give you some type of longer form tutorial video that anyone who just needs some extra help understanding how Convex works or understanding maybe how you can use AI to potentially submit to this hackathon. I'm hoping that this video will give you some inspiration and also just kind of teach you some things about connecting with OpenAI and just using Convex. So let's walk you through what I built, and then you can watch through the whole tutorial and look at the code that I will have in a public Git repo that you can use at any time as a reference point when you're building your own hackathon submission. So here's the walkthrough. We got a little project here where it's a text-based RPG game, right? And the Dungeon Master is OpenAI. The Dungeon Master is going to help guide you through this adventure, and you're going to answer questions that I might ask you. It'll throw enemies at you. It'll give you items. We're going to go ahead and start this adventure as the warrior, but I have a wizard, a warrior, and an archer. I'm going to go ahead and say the warrior, and I'll say start an adventure. So when this game first initializes, we are asking OpenAI to basically create a text-based RPG adventure, and I kind of give it some rules about like what's going to happen. And I'm going to have it ask us questions, and we have to answer with what we want to do next on this adventure, right? So here is the dialogue we're having with the AI here. And it's basically asking us to start with an adventure where we're in an undead dungeon with enemies and other things. And one thing I want to show you is that all of the items that the OpenAI decides to give you, I'm actually using DALL-E under the hood to generate icons for those, right? So you saw those things loading. When DALL-E finishes loading those previews, I'm actually displaying them here. Okay? And also we have this image here that's going to kind of paint a picture of what the current scene is in our adventure. And then also we have the health. Now the cool thing about this entire thing on the right is I ask OpenAI to give me a JSON format of my current inventory and my current health points. And I take that JSON format and I use it to display all this data. Okay, so let's just go ahead and start exploring the dungeon. Okay, go ahead and click submit. And I will say that this is more of like a prototype. I spent 2 to 3 hours working on this. If I had more time, I would spend a ton more time making this perfect and polished. But I just wanted to kind of get something out there for you all so you can learn how to use Convex, learn how to use OpenAI, you learn how to use Convex image storage. All these images are being stored in Convex's image storage. And all these images, like I said, are being generated from DALL-E. So I said, explore the dungeon. The Dungeon Master says, as you venture deeper into the dungeon, your footsteps echo ominously throughout the cold stone corridors. You cautiously explore the twists and turns, hoping to encounter your first set of enemies. After a few minutes of exploration, you come across a dimly lit room. There are 3 skeletons standing guard. They spot you, preparing to attack. Roll the dice to determine the outcome of your battle. Remember, the 1 is the worst outcome and 6 is the best outcome. Please enter your dice roll. If you have like a physical dice, you could just roll it and then you could type it in here. But I added this little thing here. I found a cool library that basically rolls the dice for us. And based on the outcome, it will just put that right into the input. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that. And let's see, I rolled a 6, so we should probably kill all these skeletons pretty quickly. Okay, it says, with a roll of a 6, your battle against the skeleton goes extremely well. You skillfully maneuver around their attacks, making precise strikes with your broadsword. In a matter of minutes, all 3 skeletons lie defeated at your feet after the battle. You search the room and find a small chest hidden behind a loose stone. Upon opening it, you discover a health potion. You add it to your inventory and bring your total count to 2 health potions. What would you like to do next? I'll say search the skeletons. Okay, so we found no items with that one. I'll say explore the dungeon some more. All right, so I guess I explored some more. I found some other enemies or zombies I'm fighting. Now, one thing I noticed with this project is sometimes OpenAI decides to just roll for you, which is not... There needs to be a lot of tuning, right? You have to tune OpenAI and do a lot of prompt engineering to make sure it's not like doing dumb things for you. Unfortunately, sometimes this happens from what I've seen where it basically rolls for you and you don't get to roll the dice yourself, which kind of stinks. But it is what it is. We killed the zombies. We got a silver key. They dealt 2 damage to my HP. So you'll see here my actual health actually dropped. And for some reason, the preview of this battle is not even showing up. That's another thing I'll have to look into after this video. But I think this is a pretty cool prototype to introduce you to the category of the best innovative AI submission. I think it does a lot of cool things, and it really stresses all the different things you can do with Convex in terms of your actions, your mutations, your queries, and your image storage as well. So if you guys are interested in seeing how I built this, stick around. This tutorial should be like 2 to 3 hours, and I think it has a lot of good information. So let's just go ahead and start diving into the code, and we will figure out how to build this together. All right, so like always, I'm going to create a new repository where we can kind of keep all this code as I'm working on it. So for the repository name, I'll say Convex, and then we will say text adventure. Okay, I'll go down here, just say MIT. Go ahead and create it. Now, I will say if you are participating in the hackathon, if you make a public repository, remember, do not commit your keys to the repo because everyone can get your keys. And if you're integrating with like OpenAI or some other type of AI software, your keys could be exposed. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you ignore your .env files. All right, so we're going to go ahead and clone this down. Go ahead and copy this link. And then I'm going to go ahead and say git clone. And go ahead and grab that repository down. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a code editor to that text adventure project. So going to the Convex docs, they have some quick start guides that kind of walk you through exactly how you can spin up a new project. I'm going to be using Next.js, but just keep in mind they have like Next, Node, Python, Rust. Let's just click Next and let's just follow through this guide real quick. So let's just copy this command, and I already have a repo set up, so we're going to change this to a dot instead of my app. I'll just go ahead and say dot. And that is for creating a Next.js application. I'm going to go ahead and just use the defaults that it gives us. And like I mentioned before, the first thing I always do is I go through here and I make sure .env file is here. I'm just going to go ahead and say like just all .env files, never commit those. Okay, just in case. And now we have a Next.js project set up. Let's just go ahead and make sure that we can run it. That's always the first thing I do when I set up a new project is can I access it on the port that they tell us that it should be accessible? And it is. So it's looking pretty good. Let's go back to the quick start guide because we do want to continue setting up Convex. So I'm going to go ahead and say npm install Convex here. Go ahead and stop that, and I will run npm install Convex. Okay, looks like that's done. So now we can go down here, we can say npx convex dev, right? So that's kind of going to initialize your Convex project, and it will actually ask you, is this a new project? And I'm going to say yes. Now I did already configure my local CLI to work with Convex. So if this is the first time running this, you may have to go and like log in and click a link to like have your local setup sync to the Convex login. But I already did that, so I'm going to say create a new project. I'll say Convex text adventure. And at this point, we are good to go. If you notice that it does have a checkbox down here, it says Convex functions ready. And it also populated this .env local with 2 things here. This environment file is used for the local running Convex so that as you save files, Convex will automatically deploy them out to their service. You can also command click this, which will take you to your Convex dashboard where you have access to the project that you set up. You also have access to your prod and dev environments. In this case, we're going to keep it a dev for the most part. And then you also have access to seeing what functions you have deployed, the data that's there, any files, schedulers, logs. We'll kind of go through some of this stuff as we need it. But this dashboard is very useful when you're needing to debug or just verify things are getting deployed correctly. So at this point, you can kind of follow through this if you want to ingest some example data into Convex. We are actually going to kind of skip over a lot of that. Well, we are going to go ahead and go down to the context client provider here. We do want to actually set this part up. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this naming convention. I'm going to go to the app directory and I will make that file. And then make sure we copy all of this code. Click on this copy button, paste that in. And now we should be able to use that provider and wrap it in our layout. So they do explain that if you go down a little bit further, they tell you how to use it. You import it here inside your layout, and then you can wrap your children using it. Okay, so let's go to the layout. Let's go ahead and import that, and let's copy this line. And I'm going to paste it right here. And if you're following this tutorial to the T, it'll tell you how to make a mutation in a query, how to basically use that in the front end. But I'm going to cover that at a later point when that's necessary. So although I may not cover authentication in this video, they do have some good tutorials on the Convex docs that walk you through how to get set up with Clerk or Auth0. I have used Clerk personally on another side project where I'm playing around with Convex, and you literally just follow these steps and it works really well. It's super easy to get it set up. Kind of just need to wrap your app with a Clerk provider and a Convex provider with Clerk. And then you have access to doing all of these different sign-in buttons using Clerk, sign-out buttons. And then more specifically, since we've integrated Convex with the Clerk authentication, you can actually use this use Convex auth to know if you're logged in and to get your user IDs and stuff like that. For example, like if you wanted to get your user information, you just say use user straight from Clerk right there. Check it out, but I'm not going to be doing that in this video. So I think we should be good to kind of start playing around with this. So the first thing that I personally want to do is I want to just get this integrated with OpenAI and just allow us to have a UI where we can start having a conversation, right? I haven't showed what we're planning on building, but this is kind of a SketchUp or a mock-up of the idea of what I want. We have a panel here that shows your chat history with OpenAI. You have the ability to add in some new text and submit it. This is going to be a die, so like you can roll a 6-sided die to help like roll if you hit or if you miss an enemy, etc. This text adventure is kind of going to be like Dungeons and Dragons, but obviously not as complicated. It's going to be the most straightforward text adventure game I can think of. Over here on the right, this is something cool I'm going to try to do, and this is where we are going to be taking the output of OpenAI, we're going to feed it into an image generation AI and hopefully have it print out nice descriptive scenery of what is going on, right? So if you're fighting some enemies or some skeletons, hopefully it shows a battlefield with like a skeleton or two. And then I do plan to ask OpenAI to give us some JSON so that we can kind of update our UI based on our HP, or health points. And also if we were to happen to find items along this adventure, we're going to use OpenAI's DALL-E. Maybe we'll use Replicate or some other Stable Diffusion API to generate icons and have those be displayed as we're kind of progressing through our adventure. So we're going to start with this part. Hopefully this part's not too hard, ignoring the dice. Let's go back to our app. And in fact, before we do dive into that, let me just commit everything. And I'm going to go ahead and say initial commit. You watch my tutorials. I like to explain things along the way as we end up needing them. So I will talk more about Convex and like the mutations and queries and actions as we start stumbling upon them in order to implement the functionality. So don't be too worried that I'm not kind of giving you a complete overview yet. All right, so let's go to the main page here, and we're going to go ahead and just delete as much as we can. Okay, and let's go back and make sure that this properly updates. So we've deleted as much as we can, and I do want to state that you typically have to have two terminals running when you're dealing with making an application with Convex, right? The first one is going to be your running Convex terminal. This is going to listen for your Convex files, recompile them, and deploy them. And over here, we're going to have our Next.js application. So I'm going to say npm run dev, I can spell that right. And now we have two running services locally that need to be open so that we can actually like integrate. All right, so we have the app running. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a form and an input and a button here, and then probably above that, we will add some type of chat history, like a scroll bar that has some chat history, right? That should be pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and try to do that. So on this page, let's make a div. We're going to give it the background color of white. We're going to make it rounded of XL. And let's just go ahead and give this like a fixed height of, we'll do like 400 pixels for right now. We'll play around with this, make sure it's good. And then we'll give it a fixed width of 200 pixels. Okay, this is how you can do this in Tailwind, the fixed width with pixels. And that should be a panel that should show up on the left. Okay, so this will be like our history panel. And it's going to look really rudimentary until we actually like make progress, right? All right, so now let's work on a form. Let's say form, and we're going to go ahead and add an input here so that we have the ability to like type into a prompt and kind of talk to OpenAI. And I'm going to go ahead and name this message. And technically we could like make this set to a value here that we don't have. We probably also want like an on change. So we do want to keep track of some state up here. I'll say state message and set message equals use state. And we basically just want to like keep track of the message as they're typing it, right? So I'll say set message e.target.value. And make sure I default this to an empty string so that TypeScript is happy. So at this point, I'm going to verify this works. If I go ahead and just like try to interpolate this message out, and I go over here. So again, we're using Next.js app router. So make sure you put use client at the top of your stuff. I don't plan on using experimental server actions. I don't plan on really doing much server-side rendering or React server components. The beauty of Convex is that like you can quickly prototype applications using client components. And when you start using server actions and React server components, it just becomes a little bit more friction, especially with what we're trying to build. We're building a really highly interactive UI, and I don't think we really need that much server rendering going on. Okay, so that's why I'm using use client here. Just keep that in mind. So let's make sure this works. I have an input box. If I type into it, the text shows up. So we know this thing's working pretty good. Now, You notice that the input is on the far right. We want to get that input underneath this panel. Okay, so one way we could do that is we could make this be a flex. We'll say flex column, and we're going to go ahead and just wrap all this inside of that. Okay, so now we actually have these things stacked on top of each other. Doesn't look that great, but we are going to make it look better. Now, just to add a little bit of polish, I know this is going to take a lot more work to make it look really nice. Let's just move this down a little bit. I'm not going to waste too much time on polishing up the input because I do plan on bringing in like a component library in a little bit, but I just want to make sure that we have like something that we can click on and try to get something displayed here. So we also want a button, like a submit button. Let's go over here. I'm going to add a button and we will say submit. And when someone submits and clicks this button, what we want to do is we want to call an on submit callback. Okay, now what this on submit callback needs to do is we're going to take the form and of course we're going to prevent default. And then we can start doing some stuff with the data that was inputted inside of the state, right? So we're going to take the state and we're going to do something with it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find out a way to send this off to some type of action. So when someone submits this, what I want to do is I want to send this to a Convex action. Okay. Now, when you're dealing with Convex, you have queries. That's basically for grabbing data from your Convex database. You have mutations, which is for writing data into your database. And then you have actions, and actions are used for integrating with third-party services such as OpenAI, right? So in this scenario, the UI is going to talk to an action. The action is going to talk to OpenAI. And then when the action is done doing that third-party integration, it can then write some data to the database, which we could display in this chat panel. Okay, so let's try doing that. Now, we haven't made a Convex action yet. Okay, so how do you do that? You go to this Convex directory and you just make a new file here. I'm just going to go ahead and make a file called chat.ts. You can name this whatever you want, but we'll call it chat.ts, and we want to make an action. So again, I'm going to go to the Convex docs because using documentation when you're learning something is a great way to understand it. And we're going to go down to this backend functions panel. We're going to talk about actions here. So if you want to talk to OpenAI, you want to use an action, and this is how you can define an action handler or an action function. So let's just go ahead and paste this code into this, and we're going to go ahead and just save it. Now notice that when I save this, you'll see your Convex terminal basically see that you made a change. I'll do it one more time in case you don't see it. So I save it, it says preparing Convex functions. And then when it's ready, you can actually go to your Convex dashboard and go to functions, and you will see that function show up over here. Okay. And if you click on it, you can see when it's getting invoked, how many errors you get. You get a little snippet of the code. You can actually view logs of that if you go down here. So let's try this out. Let's go to the front end now and let's integrate with this. Can we actually invoke this action from the front end? And maybe not calling it do something. Let's call it like handle player action. Okay, because this is basically going to take in the player's input and we have to talk to OpenAI and figure out what we're going to do next. Okay, so now notice when I save this, that gets updated in the Convex dashboard and we can view that new renamed action over here. So going back to the front end, how do we use that? Okay, well, let's go ahead and go back to the docs. And a way you can basically do that is go to the calling actions from client section over here. And we are going to go ahead and import this use action from React or from Convex React. Okay, so let's import that. And we are going to go ahead and invoke it. Okay, we're going to invoke it like this. Now, this is a custom hook, right? So you have to actually call this at the top of your component. And this thing is going to be the function you can invoke whenever you want. So we're going to call this handle player action. And inside the use action hook, we actually want to import our API. And something that's great about Convex is everything is type safe. So if I do API dot, you'll see chat pop up, which is like the namespace of the things related to chatting with OpenAI. And then you click dot and notice that our function pops up. Pretty cool. Now, secondly, we need to be able to allow a user to pass in some type of arguments. So how do you do that? Well, down here, you can call the function. Okay. But how do you pass in the actual like message? How do I do that, right? Because if you try to do this, it's going to complain. What you need to do is if you go back to your Convex action here, you can actually specify args here. And so that I'm not going off of memory, let's just look at here as an example. You basically need to pass it an object, and that object is going to have some properties which are going to define what comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and say like message. I'm going to say v, and I'm going to import convex values. This is kind of like, it kind of reminds me of Zod. It's like a Zod validator, but you can define the things that need to come in. So this needs to be a string. Okay. So now if you go back to your page and go to message, it's all good because now it knows that you're passing a string. If you were to change this to a number on accident, it'll complain, it'll give you a warning, and everything is good. So for those who have watched my content, you'll know that this is very similar to TRPC, and it's one reason why I really like Convex. I love TRPC, I love the T3 stack, and when I started doing some work with Convex, it just made a lot of sense. It just felt like it was a nice transition from TRPC into a complete backend as a service, and I really like it, so I think it's really cool. All right, so let's go down here. I'll type in some message. Notice that I do need to fix the styling of that, but I'm going to click submit. And I do want to point something out is that Convex does the communication with WebSockets. So you'll see that we actually sent a message to the backend Convex service using WebSockets. And Convex is going to return responses using WebSockets as well. And we'll see this in a bit where when you start changing things on your database, your UI will automatically get that message and update. It's like one of the coolest things I've seen. But anyway, we just submitted some text. Let's go back to our Convex dashboard, which I believe is this one. And you'll notice that we did get an invocation over here. And if I go to my logs, you'll see that if I click on this drop-down filter, you will see that, well, let me go ahead and just select the one we want. We got two invocations. I invocated this earlier on accident, but this is the one that we just did right here. And notice that it was a success. So what we can do at this point is we know that we can send a message to the action. Everything's working good. So if we go to the action, we want to actually integrate this with OpenAI so we can send it like a message and ask OpenAI like to do some text completion. Okay, so let's go to the OpenAI Node API library, and I'm going to go ahead and install this. This is what we're going to use to integrate with OpenAI on Convex. Let's just go ahead and install that. And while that's installing, let's just go ahead and grab some of this example code. Okay, let's go here. I'm going to paste that in. And you'll notice that this defaults to process OpenAPI key. Okay, so for right now, we will just delete all this. Okay, and then some more code. Let's grab this completion model. And what we want to do is we want to send the message that came over from the front end, and we want to send that to a completion. Okay, so now how do you actually get that message? Well, we haven't talked about the callback for handlers, but the first thing that you get is called a context, and context gives you access to the various Convex related things, right? So from here you have run action, run mutation, run query, you have scheduler, and you have storage if you want to store a file or something. But what we want to do is get a second argument here, and I will say args. Okay, and args is actually going to be typed have that message in a property. Okay, so we want to make sure that we put async here so that we can properly do async await. And then we are going to go ahead and take that message. I'll say args.message, and we want to send that over to OpenAI. Let's just go ahead and return the completion here. Now this won't work because we haven't set up our API keys. So let me show you how you do that in Convex, right? So you can't just go and put your API keys here in .env local. You actually need to go to your Convex dashboard, and you need to go down to settings and make sure you're on the dev mode right here. And I'm going to go down to environment variables, right? So again, as you're saving your Convex functions, those are getting deployed to a real environment. So you're going to have to set up environment variables to like get access to that. All right, so I don't have an OpenAI key just yet. So let's go over to OpenAI, and we're going to create a new secret key. Now, just keep in mind, whenever you make secret keys, make sure you don't leak them. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and we will say Convex text adventure, and go ahead and create that. And now I have my secret key. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. And I will delete this after this tutorial, so don't worry that you guys can see it. I know people always get worried when they see videos that have keys in them. I'm going to delete it, don't worry. And that's all you need to do with OpenAI. You just make a key, and as long as you're using this OpenAI package, you can start doing text completions with OpenAI chat, okay? So let's make sure this is all wired together. We got the thing set up properly. We got the environment variable. We got the function. So before I actually test this out in the UI, let's just console log the completion here. Now, when you console log in the backend of your Convex action or your mutation or query, it'll actually show up in your terminal down here. So if I type in some text, is today's day, click submit, we will see that print out the OpenAI response and says today is Thursday. Obviously that's wrong. Today is Monday when I'm recording this video, but this is what's going to print out. So we can actually use this completion for various things. Okay. Again, we're making a text adventure game, so we're going to have to make like the thing that we ask it a little bit more verbose and intelligent. But that's basically the idea. You can make a request to OpenAI. You have the response here. And then in your front end, you can use that if you want to. There's also something cool I want to share with you. If you actually go to your Convex dashboard, if you don't even want to test in your UI, you can actually go over here and click run function, or you can actually go down here and say there's a shortcut, and you can pass in the function input. Okay, so if I want to go ahead and pass in a message here and say like, what is today's day? And if I click run action, you'll notice over here we get the same log. All right, so this is like a kind of a shortcut if you don't want to have to like keep going to your UI and doing stuff. You can actually test your Convex actions and mutations directly in this UI, which is really useful. All right, so let's see if we can complete the circle. I want to go ahead and just change on the main page itself. I want to just change the input just a little bit and say text black so we can actually see what we're typing. Same thing with over here. I'm going to say text black. So now what we're trying to do is we want to display the history. Okay. Now, unfortunately, when we talk to OpenAI, we didn't store the inputs or the outputs anywhere, right? This is just like you do an action, you get back some responses, but we're not storing it in a database. Convex gives you the ability to kind of store things in their own database. It's actually really easy to do since you have access to this context option. Okay. So if I want to, for example, store some data, let's go and see what the data structure is of the OpenAI request that comes back, which I think we should already have. This looks like this is typed properly. So let's say completion dot choices is going to be an array. I think the first one that comes back and message should be what we want. Okay, let me just double check. So this is what we got back from OpenAI. We got an ID, we got choices, we got the first thing that came back, message, content. Now there's other stuff in here that you might want to use. But in our case, we just want to store the content that came back and maybe the input. So this is going to be the response. I'm just going to go ahead and save that as response. And then over here, I'm going to say input is equal to args.message. Okay, these are the two things we want to store somewhere. So how do you store these in some type of table? Well, you can simply say context, and then I can say run mutation. And we haven't actually gotten to this part yet, but actions can't talk directly to a database. You have to call a mutation, and the mutation is what is going to talk to the database. The documentation in Convex explains why this is the case. Mutations are atomic. They're kind of basically transactional type of writes. Read through this. I definitely recommend reading through this, but this is the one place that you can actually insert data into your database. So going down here and reading this part is probably super important. It says mutations run transactionally. And if you don't know what a database transaction is, basically it's like if you were to write 5 different things into the database, if one of those things happens to fail due to some type of database constraints or whatever, all of those writes will basically roll back. It kind of acts like an all or nothing type of thing, right? So like everything has to work or else it just rolls back all their changes. But that might be over your head. You might not even need to know about that if you're a beginner. So how do we take the response and the input that came back and store it somewhere? Well, let's go back and let's scroll down a little bit, and it's actually super easy to make a mutation. I'm going to go ahead and say export const, and I will say store entry, and I'm going to say equals mutation. Okay, go ahead and auto import that. And again, just like we did with the action, this thing can take in some args, and we can go ahead and say input. We'll say v.string, and we will say response v.string. Okay, and then over here we'll do a handler. And we will say async, we will say context, we'll say args, and we're going to go ahead and just set that equal to a function here. So now if you do ctx dot, you'll notice that we get back this db object. This is what you can use to write to the database, or you can read from the database. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say db, and then I'm going to say insert. And now the first argument is the table name. Again, you don't have to define a schema with Convex off the bat. Convex allows you to quickly prototype things, and then once you're happy with what you've inserted into your database, you can actually go to the Convex dashboard and export a nice schema for your database. I'll show that in just a second, but let's just go ahead and get this data inserted. I'm going to insert into an entries database, and we're going to insert a input. So let's say args I'll say input is args.input, and then we'll do a response is args.response. Okay. And then make sure you await on this, right? This is a promise. You want to await on this. And then you could potentially return something back from this mutation if you want to. But in our case, we don't really care. All right, so let's scroll up a little bit. How do you actually run this mutation from this action? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say API. And I went ahead and auto imported that up here. So notice I imported API from generated API. And you can say .chat store entry. And I might actually rename this to insert entry. Maybe that makes more sense. Let's save that. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass it the things that this thing needs, right? This thing needs the input. And then it needs a response. Now, I do believe this is complaining because response can potentially be null. So if we wanted to, we could kind of fall back on an empty string or something. Or if you wanted to do more advanced error handling, that's probably a good idea too. Let's just go ahead and add that in and save it. And this does return a promise, right? So we should probably await on this thing. All right, so what this is going to do is after we've talked to OpenAI, we get a input, we get a response, and we're going to store that via kicking off a mutation. And we did that by calling API chat insert entry. That's going to basically come down here, and that's going to invoke this mutation, which is going to call the database and store that information. Okay, so let's make sure this works. I'm going to go over here to create next app, click submit, and that should have kicked off that action. And notice that if I go to insert entry, we have one invocation. So it looks like that did get invoked. And if I go to data over here, you'll see that there's a table now called entries, and it has the input of hello world. And we also have OpenAI's response. That's pretty cool, right? We don't have to really define much, but I do want to talk about a schema. So now that you have like this prototype and you think everything is good, if you go down to show schema, that'll tell you all of the correct schema types you need to add to your project so that you get better type safety. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add this to a schema.ts file over here. I'll say, I'll right click on this, I'll say schema.ts, and I'll paste that in. All right, so this is the thing that you use to basically give better type safety and tell your local code in TypeScript what tables you have and what properties those tables have and what values those properties will be. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and save that. Now let's try to figure out how do we get these entries displayed in the UI. Okay, now when it comes to Convex, you can use something called a use query inside React to basically tell your UI to listen for changes with a particular table or a particular like entries of a table. So in our case, let's say const entries is equal to use query. I'll go ahead and auto import that from Convex. And we are going to call a query. Now we don't have one created yet, right? So let's go back over here. And I'm going to go ahead and just make one more function. I'll say export const. I'll say get all entries equals query. And this thing probably doesn't need any arguments, so I will just give it a handler. Actually, make sure we import this first. Okay. And then I will say handler, and that's going to be a function that has a context. Okay. Now, how do we get data from a database? Well, we can say const entries is equal to await context.db. We've already done that before, so this shouldn't be too new to us. But we want to do a query. Now, queries are a little bit different in Convex. So I definitely recommend go to the docs and let's look at queries real quick. Here is an example of how you can do a query. So you basically say do a query and give it the table name. So in our case, we're going to say query and we want to give it entries. Look at that nice auto completion with TypeScript. And then we want to get all of the things that are in this table. So we could simply just say collect, right? But if you want to actually filter down for something that's more specific, you can actually do a filter. And then this thing takes a callback where you can do different types of special queries, right? So for example, you can query to get everything that has a task list of ID inside of this argument. Okay, now we'll probably see this later on. I just want to show you like the bare minimum of how to get this going. But let's just go ahead and return all the things in the database. And then I'm going to say return entries. All right, so like the mutation in the action, after we've created that, we can simply just go over here and I'm going to say api.chat. Notice that it shows up right here. Get all entries, super easy to do. And now this thing is automatically going to hook into Convex. And when those entries get updated, this will refire behind the scenes with a WebSocket event that comes in, and you'll have the latest, greatest entries right here. So what do I mean by that? I'll show you. Let's just go ahead and loop over every entry here. And for every entry, I'm going to return, we'll just say a list item, and we're going to interpolate entry response. And we're also going to, we'll do this twice. We want 2 list items. We'll do one for the entry response, and then above that, we'll say entry dot input. And for right now, instead of LIs, I'm just going to do divs, because I do want to basically wrap this in another div and give it a key of entry.key, or sorry, entry.id. Go ahead and close this off. Go ahead and save this. I think I just need to add an extra div here so I can save that. Now entries will potentially be undefined. So what you want to do is you just want to do a question mark there. So TypeScript is happy about that, because you can't map over an undefined thing, right? So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just add one more thing here. I'm going to say class name. I'll say flex call, the gap of 2, text of black. And then also let's just go ahead and add some padding to this, because it was looking kind of rough. Let's just go ahead and add padding of 2 to the entire thing, and here we go. So here is where it all should just click together, right? Convex, again, is a highly reactive service where as you start doing your mutations, your queries are automatically going to fire off, and you're going to see that data come back. Okay, so I'm just going to say how many sides to a normal dice. Click submit. And notice that these answers automatically get back. They automatically updated in our UI. We didn't have to write any update logic. Okay, that's the main takeaway. We just fired off an action, and we have a query that's getting data back from the database. And when that data comes back, our UI just updates. This is probably one of the coolest features. I mean, Convex has a lot of cool things to it, I'm not gonna lie, but this is the one thing that like made me realize that you can achieve a lot more with a lot less code by just having this all work behind the scenes with automatically updating your UI. So let's just do a little bit of tweaks, because right now this UI is still pretty bad. Like for example, this input should clear out after we submit. So I'm going to go ahead and go to here, and I will say that message is going to be equal to an empty string. That should automatically clear that out. Enter, and that'll go away. Another thing that might be good to do is put this in a scroll bar and increase the width of this a little bit. So I'm actually going to make this be like 700, and I'm going to make this and I'll make this an overflow Y auto. Okay. Oh, I changed the wrong thing. This needs to be width of like that. I'll do height of 300. About 300, 300. I'm going to do one more request. I just don't think we have enough data. There we go. So there we have it. We have the scroll bar that is going to basically show all the entries that we have asked OpenAI, and those will be stored in the Convex database and just kind of reflect as we're doing work. And just in case you're not really impressed yet, like this thing hasn't clicked with you, let's go to the Convex dashboard, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything. I'm just going to go ahead and clear this table out, and I'm going to go back to my UI. Notice everything just wiped out, right? Because again, your query is listening for the database changes, and as those change, your query fires off, your UI updates. So I can actually go through here and I can just add entries directly in this table if I want to, and you will see them show up in your UI. So in this case, I think we wanted like an input. I'll say hello world, and then we want a response here that says GG. Go ahead and save this. I'll go back to my UI, and there it is. All right, we made some good progress. I think I kind of covered the main basics of actions, queries, and mutations. You're going to need all of those to basically build out any type of working application that you'll be doing for this hackathon. So I think if you understood what I just showed you there, you'll be in a really good spot. Let's just go ahead and commit what we have. I'll go ahead and add everything. And then I will say initial work to ask OpenAI a question and store the response and display it. Okay, so if you ever wanted to kind of like go back to this commit, this is where you basically go to find that. All right, so we have a decent prototype where we can ask OpenAI questions and we'll get a response and have that displayed. I want to take a step back, and we want to actually make a page that allows someone to basically set up an adventure and click a button so that we can prompt OpenAI with some information about what it needs to do, right? Right now, it doesn't understand that like we're going to play a text-based adventure game, but we need to let OpenAI understand that. The simplest thing we could do to kind of set that up is I'm going to make the home page be that, create an adventure, and I'm going to make a sub route here called like adventure. And we're going to move some of that code inside that adventure page. So I'm going to go ahead and move that and make sure this is the right import. And what this is going to allow us to do is now we can go to /adventure like this, and we can see that page. So the home page needs to present a little bit more information about the adventure that we're going to set up. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say export default function, and I'll say like main. And I do want to go back to the other page real quick. I'm going to change this name to adventure, just so we kind of have it named properly. And now what we need to do on this main page is we're going to add a button here. So I'm going to go ahead and return a div. And let's just go ahead and say button start and add adventure. All right, so when someone clicks on this button, again, we're going to fire off some type of action or some type of mutation potentially to kind of kick off this whole process, right? You might have different adventures for different users, and you need to store those adventures with an adventure ID. So let's try to get that going. So when someone clicks on this button, I'll just say on click, we want to call something. So in our case, we're going to make a new action up here in Convex, and we're just going to go ahead and make a new one called adventure. And we want this to be a mutation. So I'm going to go over here and just look for like mutation just to make sure that we're doing this right. Here we have one. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste this in the adventure file like this. Make sure that we import everything that we need. Import the V from Convex values. And what we want to do is we want to basically create adventure. Okay, we want a mutation where someone can create a new adventure. And what this is going to do is basically set up a new adventure that we can track all these entries. So I'm going to say adventure here. And so when I say adventure, like we want to kind of track the scenery, maybe the theme. Are you in a forest? Are you in a dungeon? Are you like a wizard? Are you a warrior? So these are some of the things that I'm thinking off the top of my head that like we want to store in the adventure configuration. And then this could have like a list of entries attached to it, right? That's like a foreign key or something. Right now, let's not really even worry about arguments. I'm going to go ahead and just comment that out and over here. But for adventures, we're going to go ahead and say class, or say character class, because class is kind of reserved keyword. I'm going to say warrior. So we're going to hard code the character class to warrior right here. And notice that we are getting some TypeScript errors here because we have a schema file. We haven't defined adventure. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'll say add adventures. And we want to go ahead and say character class, and that's going to be a string. All right. Let's go back to this. I'll put an S here because I call it adventures in the schema. And now when you click on this button, we want to invoke this mutation. Let's go over here, and I'm going to go ahead and just call a function. And as we saw before, in order to invoke mutation in Convex, you have to import it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say const create adventure equals use mutation. I'll say API dot adventure dot create adventure. Okay, now we have a function that we can actually invoke when someone clicks on this button. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say create adventure, and I will put an async here so we can wait on it. And we're going to go ahead and pass it nothing because it doesn't really need any arguments right now. Maybe later down the road we'll add some, but we're going to create that adventure, and when that is set up in our database, we probably want to navigate to the adventure page. So how do you do that with Next.js? Well, you can bring in the router. So say const router is equal to use router, and make sure you bring the router in from navigation. The other router is for the pages router, and we're using the app router here. As you can tell, we have the app directory. So make sure you pull in next/navigation, use router, and then we could say router.push adventure. All right, let's make sure this works. It looks like we need to put a use client at the top of this. All right, hard to see, but we got a little button over here. We are going to center that real quick. Let's just go ahead and put a class name here. I'll say this will be flex. I'll say justify center. I'll say item center. I'll say width of full. I'll say height of v screen. Or actually, how do you do it? It's h screen. There it is. So now we should have a button right in the middle. Okay, we basically just made this div be full width, full height. We put this button right in the center. If you click on it, we should start an adventure. We'll go to that adventure page. So going to Convex, you'll notice we have an adventures table now, and we have an adventure ID, which has a warrior for the character class and a creation time. So now that I think about it, maybe it would make more sense when we start an adventure, it'll take us to that adventure ID up here, so we can kind of use that as a primary key for getting back all the entries that we've done historically on this adventure. All right, so easy to do. We just go up here and we're going to go ahead and make a new directory here. I'll say adventure ID, and we're going to put that page right there. Okay. If you're not familiar, this is how you kind of allow you to get path parameters. You just put these brackets here, adventure ID, and that'll give you access to them inside of the props that are passed into your page component. Okay. Now, if you do change the directory structure, make sure your imports are good. You can also probably do some type of like aliases here. I haven't had that set up, so we won't worry about that right now. But let's go back to our page, because now we want to actually get the adventure ID that came back when we created a new adventure. We want to push it inside this router.push, right? So let's go ahead and hopefully we'll say adventure ID, which we haven't even set up yet, right? This thing doesn't return an adventure ID. It returns null. So we want to go into this function, click that, and we want to make sure that we get an ID here, and we're going to return that ID, right? So if you hover over this, it says this is an ID of adventures, and we can return that to the front end, and now the front end is going to have that, and we can just simply push that like this into that path there. And I do think I'm going to rename, instead of adventure, I'm going to say adventures with an S at the end. Kind of the convention that a lot of people use. Like if it's a collection of things, you probably want to have an S at the end here. All right, let's try it out. Let's go back to the home page. I'll click Start an Adventure. And now we get an ID up here, and that is your unique adventure ID. So if you ever were to, pause and come back the next day, we can associate all the entries to this adventure ID. But notice here in the UI, it's actually loading all the entries that are in our database. What we want to do is we want to kind of correlate these two tables together. So let's go to our schema here, and what I'm going to do is on entries, I'm actually going to put another field called adventure ID. That's going to be v.id, and we can pass it the table that we want this thing to be associated with. So we're going to say adventures like this. Okay, so now we basically set up a foreign key and says, okay, all entries must associate with an adventure. Okay. Now at this point, we don't have that data set up. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to clear out both of these tables. I'll clear this table. I will clear this table too. We can start fresh. All right, so let's go to the create adventure mutation. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to fire an action, and we want to tell OpenAI that, hey, we're about to play a text-based adventure game. And let's just kind of get these first entries set up in our system so that we can continuously have a historic list that we can keep feeding to OpenAI. Now, we haven't fired an action from a mutation yet, but it's pretty easy. You do context, you do scheduler, and then you can say run after. And right here, we can actually give it a delay, right? So we want this to run immediately. But if you ever wanted to like have something run with some type of delay, like after a second or two, you can do the scheduler and run actions like this. I'm going to say 0. There's also a context scheduler.run at. If you look at this, you can give it a timestamp, right? But let's just go ahead and try to run a particular action. So we don't have an action out here for kind of handling that. So we are going to go ahead and probably just bring in some code. Okay, so we have this. This is handling the player action. But really, we want to do something more custom. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull a lot of this code out. And we're going to put it over here. Okay, I'll move that to the top. Go ahead and delete some of this code. Delete this. Now, another thing I haven't talked about is that when you're using Convex, there's something called an internal action, right? If you have an internal action, this is going to be a private action that you can't invoke from the front end. By default, if you create a mutation or an action or a query, your UIs can hit them. If you have an internal action, then only other Convex mutations and actions can invoke them, right? Or the schedulers can invoke them. Let's just go ahead and rename this one to setup adventure entries. And this thing is going to take in add adventure ID. That could be an ID of adventures. Okay. And we're going to figure out how to do this in a second. I'm going to comment out all that. But again, we want to call this thing from the scheduler. So the way we do that, if you go to the docs, it says calling internal functions. Let's just go ahead and import internal here. This. And now we can go ahead and say internal.adventure.setup adventures entry. And then finally, we're going to pass the arguments here. Okay, so like this thing takes in an adventure ID, and we're going to say ID like this. So again, we're just saying immediately run some type of asynchronous process. And this asynchronous process is going to do an OpenAI request to basically prompt and set up the entries, right? So I'm going to go ahead and bring this code back real quick. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pass it some content here. And let's just go ahead and write out some text. So I'm going to say, you are a dungeon master who is going to run a text-based adventure RPG for me. You will need to set up an adventure for me, which will involve having me fight random enemy encounters, reward me with loot after killing enemies, give me goals and quests, and finally let me know when I finish the overall adventure. During this entire time, please track my health points, which will start at, let's just say 10. My character class, which is a warrior. We're going to go ahead and replace this in a bit. And my inventory, which will start with a broadsword, a bronze helmet, and a health potion, which heals for 3 HP. Okay, so you can see we're kind of like telling the OpenAI, like, this is the scenario, you're going to have to walk us through this and help us play a game. Now, you can get more descriptive to really describe what the scenario is. And what I've seen when kind of experimenting with this is that it won't really give you like diverse scenarios, right? The adventures are going to be kind of the same thing every time you ask it to start one. So you can kind of describe the setting of the adventure. I'm going to say the scenario. So let's just say the adventure should have some of the following. The hero must clear out a dungeon from undead enemies. The dungeon has 3 levels. Each level has one set of enemies to fight. The final level has a boss. The final level has a chest filled with 1 steel sword, which deals 2 damage. Okay, and I'll say a broadsword that deals base damage of 1 and deals a base damage of 2. Okay, so it's going to take a lot of trial and error to like really perfect this, but I just kind of wanted to let you know, like, this is kind of the scenario that we're setting up. And then we're going to go ahead and just say, go ahead and describe the adventure for me, and then ask me for my next steps. When I am fighting enemies, please ask me to roll a 6-sided dice, with a 1 being the worst outcome of the scenario and a 6 being the best outcome of the scenario. All right, so hopefully that's enough information. I don't know, we're going to find out. But basically what I'm doing is I want to ask OpenAI this question, this scenario. It should give us this response, and then we're going to go ahead and store that input in output, right? So very similar to how we did it before, but I'm actually going to pull this whole thing out to an input variable. So I'm going to say const input is equal to this. And then down here, we will say input, save that, and now we're going to store the response here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just remove that return, because I don't think you can return from Convex actions. I could be wrong. I need to go back and read the docs about that. But I think this would be good enough. Now, like we mentioned, when we created the adventure, we set that we're a character class of warrior, but like we didn't tell this that we're a warrior, right? We hard-coded it. So I'm going to go ahead and say like character class, and we need to somehow get that. The way we can do that is we can actually run a query from inside of the internal action. Okay. Now we don't have a query for getting that, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of copy this. I'm going to go down here. For right now, I'll say internal query because I don't know if we want other people to like get the adventure. I'll say like get adventure like this. This will take in an adventure ID, and this will take in a v.id of adventures. And all we want to do is we want to basically get the adventure and return it. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this. I'll say db.get adventures. I think I can just do the adventure ID. I'll say like args adventure ID like this. And I'll pass in args here. All right, so we have a nice internal query. No one can access this from the UI just yet. We could easily just switch it to be a real query if we wanted to. But what we could do down here is we can say const adventure is equal to await context run query, the internal adventure, get adventure, and we're going to pass in the args like that. Because remember, adventure ID is passed in here. So we're basically doing a query against the database. We get back the adventure, and we got the character class right there. Hopefully. It says adventure is possibly null. So we do need to check if there is no adventure, then we should probably throw an error. So I'll say throw new error, adventure not found. And obviously this needs to be an error, so new error. All right, so there is a lot going on here, right? There's a lot going on, but hopefully this should work pretty fine. So let's just go ahead and when you click on this start an adventure, we are going to call create adventure, which does all that stuff we just talked about. It also kicks off an internal action. We're going to redirect the user to an adventures page. And now we can actually do a query to get all the entries that are related to that adventure ID. Okay, so I think the way Next.js works with like props is, I don't remember. So what we're going to do is we're going to just go ahead and say props, console log props. Okay, and we'll go back to our UI, which is here. And we want to see, what do we get back? We get params adventure ID. Okay, so this is what we want to get, params adventure ID. I'm going to go ahead and type that. If it'll let me copy it. There we go. All right, there we go. We got props and we have the params adventure ID. So what we can do is we can use this adventure ID, and when we call use query here, instead of get all entries, we're going to pass in adventure ID, and we'll say props params adventure ID. But obviously we didn't make that query to work with an adventure ID as an argument before, so we have to go to it, and we have to define args, and we're going to say this thing takes in an adventure ID, and I'll say v.id adventure ID. Oh, this would be adventures. Adventures. All right, so now we should have args here. We can kind of change this query to instead, we want to get back all of the entries that match this adventure ID. So we can say filter, and that takes in a callback that you can kind of do like a query builder with. And I'll say q.equals q.field, and we're going to go ahead and say adventure ID. And we want to make sure that the field is equal to the args.adventure ID that was passed in. So that should filter down the query and give us back all of the entries that are specifically for this adventure ID. And there are other ways to like set up indexes with Convex that make it more performant. But again, I'm just trying to do the bare minimum to get this working. I do notice some red over here. So if inserted entry has a type error because we haven't yet set that up. So I do think we can fix this real quick. This could take in an adventure ID. Again, let's just go ahead and copy this down here. So I just copy this, paste it up there, and we're going to go ahead and say adventure ID is args.adventure ID. So we modify this query. We go back to adventure. Actually, not this one. Actually, all with me. So I do notice there is some red here. If you look down here, the run mutation, it looks like since we just changed this, this thing also needs to take in an adventure ID, which we have up here somewhere, I believe, args.adventure ID. Yeah. Let's make sure we're passing the right stuff there. Make sure we don't have any red anywhere. Got some type errors here. Handle player actions. Okay, so this one, again, this will need an adventure ID. which we don't probably have, handle player actions. We probably want to take one in. Okay, so if you're not familiar with TypeScript, this is a good example of why you want TypeScript, because it's going to help you out when you forgot to pass certain things to your different functions, right? So let's just go ahead and make sure we pass that there. That file's happy, no red. This file's happy, no red. Now this one has a little bit of red. Let's try to figure out why this is. Now, if you go read through the Convex docs, they have a whole section about document IDs. And basically there is this ID type that you can use if you wanted to kind of cast things, because technically this isn't a string. This is actually an ID of adventures. And let's make sure we do the right. Oh yeah, let's just go ahead and import that here. All right, so now we're basically telling Next that, hey, although this thing actually is a string, it's an ID specifically for adventures so that we can get that type safety. And we should be good there. Now let's go down here and just fix any more areas where we're missing stuff. Props, params, adventure ID. I might pull this out to a shared variable. Let me go up here. I'm going to say const adventure ID is equal to this. Go ahead and clean that up a little bit, and we're going to reuse that right here. Oh, and I'm importing this from the wrong thing. This needs to be data model. So make sure you import from the right package. Now, I don't see any red in our code base. That's good. Hopefully this works. Again, we just did a bunch of code changes and I haven't tested anything out in the UI. Hopefully TypeScript is going to let us know we're doing the right stuff. So let's go over here. And I think we added new functionality to like create the entries. So we might need to go back and just start fresh here. So like, let's delete this adventures table and we should be good. Okay, so let's go to our app, click start an adventure. And we did get a warning. So luckily Convex will warn us if we're not awaiting on a promise thing. So scheduler.run at, it needs to be awaited, but we did get back those entries. Let's go ahead and fix that one issue. If I go over here, we just want to make sure that we're awaiting somewhere. This is saying the function create adventure. So let's find where that is. Okay. And we want to make sure we await on this. And for right now, let's delete that. So let's scroll back up. I think we fixed this warning, but let's scroll up. It says that you are a dungeon master. So that's all like the pre-made input that we made. But if you scroll down a little bit, it actually says like, welcome brave warrior to the exciting world of adventure. Okay. If you read through this, you'll notice that it actually starts playing for us, right? Roll the dice to determine your outcome. Rolling the dice, you roll a 4. So I think we need to kind of tweak what's going on here because like it's literally trying to play the adventure for us. So here we have to kind of figure out a better way to kind of word this. I think where I say go ahead and describe the adventure for me, I think that's like the main area where we messed up. So I'm going to say, given this scenario, please ask the player for their initial actions. And I'm going to make that the last sentence, right? So it's kind of clear that this is the thing I want to happen next. But I will say up here, I'm just going to say when I'm fighting enemies, please ask me to enter. I'm going to put the when I'm fighting enemies, please ask me to roll a 6-sided dice up here. Do not roll the dice for me. I, as the player, should input this, and you need to describe the outcome with my input. Okay, so hopefully, I don't know, we'll see if that's good enough. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to click Start an Adventure, and hopefully that gives us some better information. I will say that this prompt just needs to be a little bit wider. It's very hard to play this game with not enough width. So let's go to the page. Oh, I think we have the width hard-coded here, so I might just do this. And that'll make it full width, but we actually want to give it half and half. So I think if we were to instead do like a CSS grid here, maybe above that, like I say, like grid, and we're to say grid calls to. Okay, let's just go ahead and do this so that it's half and half, right? We have the prompt and we have the dialogue here, and we have over here, we're gonna have like a maybe an image of what's going on in the scene, and then some icons. Maybe even some more height too. This thing looks like it's a little small. Let's do height of 400, maybe even 450. All right, let's see if this works now. So welcome, Brave Warrior. All right, it says, welcome to the thrilling world of adventure. You find yourself standing at the entrance of a dark, airy dungeon ready to embark on a treacherous journey. Before you begin, let me introduce you to your current status. Character class, warrior, health points 10, inventory, broadsword. Okay, now it's time for you to decide on your initial actions. What do you wish to do? Okay, so this is a better prompt, right? The AI seems like it understood a little bit better what we're trying to get. So what I'm going to do is we need to kind of modify the handle player action here. And when we ask the AI to kind of play for us, so what I want to do is in the handle player action, okay, we're going to go up and we're going to figure out where that's defined. What we want to do is we want to take the entire list of entries that we've done in our current adventure, and we're going to feed that as a prefix to OpenAI so it knows what we're doing. Because right now, we don't feed it the previous history, right? We just kind of send it some information. And yeah, like we just send it a message. So if you just send it what's in your input prompt, like it's not going to understand we're playing a game. It doesn't have that context. So what I'm going to do is before this, we're going to go ahead and say const entries is equal to await. And we want to grab all of the entries related to this adventure ID. Now, again, we're going to have to do a query over here because this is an action, right? So I don't think we have access to the database. So we actually have to go up here. I'll say export const get entries for adventure equals query. In fact, I'm going to make this an internal query like this. And we're going to say this thing takes an args, pass in an adventure ID. Then also it's going to take in a handler like that. And we want to just basically say return context DB. We want to query a particular database. We'll get all the entries. And remember, we've done this already, right? We just do a filter. We do q.equals, and we'll say q.field adventure ID. And I believe over here, we can just say args.adventure ID. Okay, and then finally, we'll say collect, right? You have to pass it collect so that you can get all the information back. All right, so now we have an internal query that we should hopefully be able to invoke down here, right? So I'll say context run query. We're going to pass it internal. We're going to pass it adventure, or we're going to pass it, oh, we're on chat. This is chat. So I'll say chat. We'll say get adventures, get entries for adventure. And of course, the second thing we need to pass it is the adventure ID. So I'll say adventure ID is args.adventure ID. Okay, so we're basically just doing a query against this code that we just wrote. Okay. And now we get back all the entries here. So we want to basically look at this, make sure that it's typed correctly, and it is. And we want to get a prefix. So before we just send a message here, we're going to go ahead and just say const prefix is equal to entries.map. And then for every entry that we have, we should have an input. Actually, let me just do this. I'll do entries.map, and I'll say entry. And then for every entry we have, I'm going to say return a string of entry.input. Maybe do 2 new lines, and I'll say entry.output or response. 2 more lines. All right, so now we have like an array of a bunch of strings. Technically, I don't need to add the new lines here because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say .join with some new lines. All right, so now we have a prefix. We can simply just add that prefix here. We're going to go ahead and take the prompt that the user wrote. We'll pass that directly right there. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this. I'll say const user prompt is equal to args.message, just to make it a little bit more descriptive. Because right now, not that descriptive. So I don't know why, but like having this return like breaks a lot of stuff. Technically, we don't even need to send this to the front end. So I'm just going to get rid of it, right? For some reason, that makes TypeScript happy. And I'm okay with that. So we run the mutation, and then all of this should be stored. So let's test this out. Hopefully it works. Exploring the dungeon. Let's see if this gives us some type of response. You take your first steps into the dungeon, the cold stone walls closing in around you. As you venture deeper, you come across a crossroads. To your left, a corridor stretches in the darkness, while to your right, you can hear faint whispers echoing afar. Shout loudly to see if the whispers respond. Okay, I shout loudly. Someone says, "Who dares disturb my slumber, my sword, and ready for battle?" Okay, we're about to get into a battle. Okay, so a group of creatures approach. They emerge from the darkness. Their decaying bodies ready to attack. Roll the dice. Okay, let's just roll a dice. I'm gonna say, we'll say we did a 4. Okay, so I mean, it says I became victorious. I did take some health points. I lost 2 health. I searched the remains of the defeated undead. You find a small pouch containing some loot. Inside, you discover a rust key and a tattered map. So then it prints out my inventory. So I think this is a good start. I think we have a nice prototype, and we can continuously tune this if we want to. But ultimately, I want to show you more about, using AI to generate images. And what we could do is the next steps is we want to basically take the entire prompt that OpenAI has, like all the history, and maybe not even the entire history. We can just take like the most recent output, and we want to feed that into either DALL-E, which is an OpenAI service that can generate images, and we can maybe show an image that describes the scene that we're currently playing. So I think that would be the next steps that I want to tackle. All right, so now what we want to do is I want to get the AI, probably I'm going to start with DALL-E and see how that works, to just take the prompt and try to generate a scene so we can kind of like visualize what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a new file, I guess. And I could just say visualize, maybe. And we could potentially just use an action for this. We're probably going to need an action mutation. So I'm going to go ahead and find out where we are doing a action already. Okay, this looks like we are doing an action here. So I'll go ahead and grab this, and we'll put it in the visualize function. Okay, so this needs to be a public action, so I'm just going to import action here. And what we're going to have to do is we need to basically use the previous adventure history, join it all together, and then ask OpenAI or DALL-E to basically, ask OpenAI to summarize it and give us a nice description of like an image of what's currently happening. Let me make sure I auto import some of the stuff. We're going to need the adventure ID. We're going to need to call this visualize latest entries, maybe. We'll see how this works, right? I'm playing around with this. Maybe this will work, maybe this won't. All right, so here's where we are basically fetching all the entries and combining them together. For right now, I'm just going to copy and paste that into what we want. So we will just go ahead and paste it here, maybe. And make sure we import some of these internal functions, right? So we need to be able to get the adventure based on the adventure ID. And then we check to make sure it's a valid adventure. And then we get all the entries for that adventure. And then we set up a prefix. A lot of this code could probably be dried up, but I'm just not going to worry about it just yet. So once we have this, we want to basically ask OpenAI, we want to say, hey, can you summarize and give us like an image that describes this adventure? Okay, so I'll just go ahead and say like previous entries, like this. Combined, maybe I'll make it more explicitly named, and we want to basically ask it a question. I'll say, given a list of previous adventure entries for a game, or for a text adventure game we are playing, I'll say, please create a descriptive prompt for an artist with no context of the adventure, so that he can draw the most recent events in the adventure. Okay, I'll do that. And I'll say list of adventure history. Actually, I'm going to say history of adventure. Here is the history of the adventure. So sometimes I don't really know what I could ask OpenAI. Hopefully this will give us what we want, but this should give us back some information which we can use to kind of pass that into the DALL-E API to like create an image or something. So we get the response here. And what we actually want to do is we're going to go ahead and try to pass that to the DALL-E API, which let's go and look that up. So going over to the docs of DALL-E, you literally just have to do this and it'll give you an image URL. So we're going to go ahead and copy this in. And I will say image response. And it's saying create image does not exist. Why does that not exist? At this point, I don't know if this is work. I don't know why this is red. I'm going to assume this is the correct interface. Maybe they didn't properly type this, so it's kind of confused. But let's just go ahead and try to get the image URL, and I'm going to say console log the image URL. And this will be the image response like this. And so this thing is the response that OpenAI is giving us from this prompt, right? So we actually need to kind of pass that to here. Hopefully it's good. I'm going to console log that too, just so we can like visualize it and make sure that we're on the right track, because this could potentially give us some bad stuff. Yeah, so let's just try that out. I'm going to go to the Convex dashboard. I'm going to go to functions, and we're going to go to, all right, so this isn't even compiling because like it's having some issues here. So I'm going to say as any, and if this doesn't work, I'm not going to have to Google to figure out why this isn't working. So if I go to this function, I should be able to just invoke it from the Convex dashboard. And let's just say run function. And we want to give it a adventure ID, which I don't remember what ours is. So I think if we go to our app here, it's this one. So let's just go ahead and pass that string there. And I'll click run action. All right, OpenAI create images, not a function. So at this point, we got to figure out why do we not have access to create image, because if you read the docs of OpenAI, it says OpenAI.create image. Yeah, I don't know. People are saying that you can import OpenAI API from the OpenAI package. I'm trying to do that. It's not working. So I don't know if maybe the docs that I'm reading are out of date. Something's going on, but I've done this before, right? I've done this before on another project. So what I need to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to my other project that I've done this, and I'm going to grab this fetch method, which is how you can potentially generate images. Okay, it kind of sucks that I have to do this, but it is what it is, right? You got to improvise sometimes. So let's go here. I'm going to say const response is equal to await fetch, and we're going to hit this OpenAI endpoint here. Now, we have to make sure that we pass in the DALL-E API key. So I'm going to make sure I set that. And second thing we want to do is we want to say generate us one image, 512 by 512. You can do a response format if you want JSON, but I think by default you can like not put this, and it'll give you back an actual like URL. This could be image response, and let's just go ahead and look at this a little bit further. I get response okay, get the JSON back. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just say image fetch response, and then I'll say const image response equals image fetch response.json, and I'll wait on that. And then console log this. And all the stuff down here, I guess for some reason their docs are just wrong, so I'm gonna delete that. If you guys know, leave a comment. You know, it'd be useful to actually understand the real way to use that. But I think what we need to do is, instead of passing prompt here, we need to pass response. And let's just go ahead and run this. Now we should be able to go back to Convex, the dashboard, go back and put our adventure ID here. Let's click run, and it crashes. So you cannot find your API key. And this is probably because I called it like OpenAI API key. Maybe there's a separate API key for DALL-E. I don't know. We'll figure this out. Go ahead and try running it again. Okay, so it looks like it's doing something. And there we go. We got data back. We got a URL. So let's look at this URL and let's see, is this something that describes our previous thing? Kind of. I mean, it looks pretty good. I think the previous thing we did was we killed some monsters, and now we're in like a dark dungeon. Okay, so that's good enough for me. I mean, that's a good start. And let's go ahead and see. So this is what the format looks like that we logged out here. It's gonna look like this. So technically we should do image response, data, the first entry URL, and that's what we need. So instead of just returning this from the action to the front end, if you think about Convex in a way that's like, you know, reactive to the WebSocket events, we should actually probably just store this URL somewhere so that we can update some data in the database, and then our query in the front end will just automatically update, right? You have to kind of think with that mindset to really help you be more productive. Otherwise, you're going to send back the URL, and then in React, you have to set up your own state, store that somewhere in state, and then refresh it when it changes. So we're going to go ahead and make a mutation here, and I can just make the mutation here right in this file. I could say const export const add entry visualization equals mutation. Make sure we import this. And this is going to take in args. And then also, of course, we need a handler. And I think I'm actually doing this wrong. This needs to be... Yeah, I'm doing this wrong. Let's do that. And handler will be a function that has async on it. Put a curly brace there and a curly brace there. All right, save that. It looks like it's good. And what we want to do is we want to make this actually an internal mutation, not a mutation, internal, so that it's private. And then we can call this, I'll say internal dot visualize dot add entry visualization. Now, in order for this to work, we're going to have to be able to pass in an entry ID. Okay, so I'll say v dot ID, and then we'll say entries, I believe is the table, like that. And we're going to have to take in the context argument here. And we want to store that visualization that we got. So I'm going to say like URL v.string. And we're going to pass those things. So we don't have the entry ID. We might need to track that. And then we also need to pass in the URL, which we call the image URL right here. So let's see, can we get back the entry ID, like the very last entry? And I see that we have an entry here, but that's mapping over all of them. So what I might actually do is I might have this taken an entry ID as well, just so we know like we're talking about the very last entry ID. And we'll pass that there. That'll update the database, which we haven't implemented yet. So I'm going to say await context db dot patch. I think this is the first time we've done a database update maybe. We want to go ahead and update the entry ID that we're passing over. So I'll say like args dot entry ID. And what we want to do is we want to set a URL here. So I'll say args.url. Okay, so this is complaining because obviously we haven't updated the schema. So let's open up the schema file. And I'm going to go ahead and just say entries, input, response, of entry ID, and I'll say URL. Maybe I should rename this to image URL so it's more descriptive. And also this is going to be optional because we don't have it defined until later on. So you can kind of wrap things with optional like that, I believe. So now I'll change this to image URL like that. And let's just do a little bit of cleanup. I'm like using the name URL and image URL in various places. So I think this will make the code a little bit easier to follow. All right, so let's try this again. But what we're going to do is we are going to pass in an entry ID here. And we don't know what the past entry ID is. So maybe I can just command click that and go to my data. Let's find the very last entry, which is where I rolled. I think this is the last entry. This is sorted by date descending. Yeah, so I can go ahead and grab this ID like that. And we're going to go back to the other one, and I'm going to go ahead and just run this. And I want to make sure that this all works, and that it's going to create an image and store it. Object contains extra field entry ID that is not in the validator. I think the issue is because I'm passing too much data here. So I think I just need to do adventure ID and pass it adventure ID like this. Okay, I was passing too much data to that query, and I think it was causing an issue. Let's try it again. Yeah, it looks like it's making some progress. Okay, so we got a success after 7 seconds. And so if we go to here, you'll see that the image URL is actually stored there now. And I should be able to open it. And it's a picture of a hallway. So that doesn't really probably describe the current history. So what I would actually want to do is I want to print out what is the prompt that it's trying to think that we need to generate an image for. I'm going to go ahead and say console log response. And then hopefully if I were to run that again, we'll see what it's trying to visualize and paint. All right, the response says explore further into the dungeon. Okay, so I would think that maybe getting more descriptive would be useful. Let me also print out what this is. We're just doing a little bit of debugging right now. I will say when you're dealing with AI, sometimes it does take a lot of time to like tune it perfectly so that you actually get good results. I've spent like hours trying to tune my icon generator on my other project. You're a dungeon master. Let's try rewording this completely. I'm going to say summarize the following adventure of a text-based RPG. Please give a 2-sentence visual description for an artist who can use the description to paint us a picture. Here's a history of the adventure. Maybe if I wrapped it in double quotes, that might help. I don't know. Let's try it again, though. I'm also going to say with the most recent events being at the end. Now, I think actually, this one looks a little bit better. The artist is to paint an image of a brave warrior standing at the entrance of a dark, airy dungeon, equipped with a broadsword, wearing a bronze helmet. So let's see if we were to go to this image now. Hopefully it's a little bit better. I mean, it's a soldier, it's a person with the sword and stuff. So maybe 2 sentences is a little bit too much. Please give us 1 sentence of a visual description for an artist who can. Anyway, I'm not going to spend all day like fine tuning this. I'm just trying to show you how to build something cool, hopefully. But at the very least, we're storing the image inside of that data structure, right? After the image gets generated, we're going to show it. So let's see if we can actually use this. I think this thing is good. We go to our UI. After we submit a new thing, like we want to trigger this action from the other convex. So I think let's go to page and we call handle player action. Let's go ahead and like pop up to that one. And this thing is where it gets all the entries. It's going to summarize, get a response, but also what we could do is trigger off that internal action that we've created in the visualize page or the visualize file. In fact, I think this could be an internal action. Okay, let's just do an internal action here. And we can go back to chat and we're going to go ahead and kick that off as well. So I'm going to say await. I'll say context, I'll say run action, and we're going to say internal dot visualize latest entries. And that thing needs to take in an adventure ID and then also a entry ID, which hopefully we have both of those. Do we have a adventure ID? We do. So we can say args dot adventure ID. And then do we have an entry ID? We have a list of all the entries. So potentially we could just get the last one in the list and use that. So let's just go ahead and say like entries, entries.length -1 .id. Okay, so fingers crossed, moment of truth. I'm always nervous when I have arrays that have this type of logic because they always crash sometimes if you don't properly initialize it. But I think when we first create the adventure, we do create some entries. So I think this should be good. This will get the last entry in the list. And then we'll say generate an image for it. So let's see if this actually works. I'm going to go ahead and just type in continue exploring the dungeon for a staircase down. All right, so we did that, and it says you continue exploring the dungeon, searching for a staircase leading further down. As you make your way through the winding quarters, you come across a locked door. The rusty key you found earlier seems to fit the lock perfectly. You want to use the rusty key to open the door. So hopefully that used that last entry response and generated some type of image for us. So if we go back to data here, and let's look at the entries. It looks like it didn't put a URL, so let's go see. You use the rusty key to open the door. So it looks like it ran. The visualize latest entries ran, but it definitely didn't update my entry. Let's look at this one real quick. I think I'm a little bit confused. I think I updated the wrong thing. We see a key, but it should have updated this one. So let's go back and try to figure out why that happened. So here's where it adds the entries. And I think maybe when we insert the entry here, maybe that's where we should actually run this code. I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to save it. And down here in the mutation, after we've inserted the entry, we should get back an entry ID. And then I'm going to run this. But this one has to be a scheduler. So I can say like scheduler.run after 0. We're going to run this one, but now we have the entry ID directly, because when you insert, you get back the ID here. So we could just tell it to visualize using that latest entry. I think that's what we want to do. And while we're at it, I mean, let's just go ahead and try to display that, because I think that'll be pretty cool. So somewhere on the page itself, we have this flex box, we have the grid. I'm going to go ahead and put a div here, and inside of this, I'm going to do an image. And we want to basically, depending on if the entry has, if the last entry has an image, then we can display it. Otherwise, we can show like a loader. So I'm going to do a drive state up here. I'll say last entry is equal to entries, entries.length -1. That should give us the last one. So entries is potentially undefined. So I'm actually going to do entries and this. So get the last entry. Otherwise, this should be undefined at some point if it's not set. And then I'm going to say, if we have a last entry and the last entry has an image URL, then we could potentially show, I know this is getting a little bit crazy, but hopefully this will work. We're going to show the image here. So we'll show the image and we'll say last entry.image URL. Otherwise, we're going to show a span that says loading. So right now it says loading because I don't think the last entry even has anything. So let's just try it again. I'm going to say I open the door with the rusty key. All right, well, we got a huge response back. It looks like it actually rolled the dice to determine the outcome of the battle. 2, roll with a 2. So it's like doing the thing for us for some reason. All right, so obviously this thing definitely needs some work, right? This thing just literally played the entire game for us without even asking us to roll anything. So we'll have to tweak that. AI is not that smart, let's just be honest. And the image, I mean, it looks okay, except for this guy's super deformed face. But it's progress, right? We have it generating images using the previous prompts. So let's just do a little bit of tweaking. I'm going to give this a height. I'll say class name height of like 300 pixels. Maybe we can do like a width of 100%. I guess it's width full since we're using Tailwind. And that'll be a little bit skewed, but you know what? We're not building an actual awesome looking application. And then what I wanted to do next, I mean, I think this is pretty good. Obviously, like I said, you could spend hours trying to tweak this and make this perfect. But we're using DALL-E, which personally, DALL-E doesn't make the best images. I think something such as Replicate with Stable Diffusion can make you better descriptive images. And then also we have to tweak and kind of figure out like the summary of the last entry. Like, what is it telling the artist to paint? Because it could be a response that's pretty bad. All right, so now let's move on to like the next part. I want to try to show the inventory and also like display the health from the recent adventures. So we can try to do a similar thing. Basically, after we get our response back, like when we insert a new entry, we could potentially ask OpenAI to summarize what we currently have in our inventory and our health and output some type of JSON for us. And maybe we can use that JSON to like further update the UI. All right, let's just try to do something similar. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file called inventory.ts. And we're going to go ahead and just try to visualize using OpenAI again. I'm going to copy everything from visualize. I'm going to put it in inventory because I'm assuming we're going to need a lot of the same stuff. So I think for the inventory, I'm going to make an internal action called summarize inventory. And that's going to use OpenAI to basically take the list of entries like we did before, and we are just going to update the latest entry to have the current summary of inventory items and health. So let's do this again. I'm going to go down here to this part. And we're going to say summarize the following adventure text RPG. and return a JSON string with the following format so that I can know what inventory items I have and also what my health points are. Here's a history of the adventure, with the most recent events being at the end. So let's just do like a JSON format. I'm going to say health, and that could be like 5 or something, or number. And then we're going to say inventory, and that's going to be an array of item, which would be a string, and that's it. So hopefully this, I can just say this is a TypeScript type. Please only give us JSON, no other output. So I don't know how this is going to work. Probably won't work too well, but we're hopefully going to get the response back, and we're not going to try to fetch any images just yet. I'm going to go ahead and comment out all that stuff. And I will say that at this point, the adventure is getting pretty long, and doing all this stuff is actually going to start costing a little bit more money as we use more tokens with the OpenAI. So keep that in mind. OpenAI does cost money. So if you just keep on doing requests over and over again, keep an eye on your bill and how much you're spending, especially if you're doing DALL-E, because DALL-E is like 2 cents per image. So if you accidentally write some type of recursive thing that like generates tons of images, it won't be a pretty sight. But yeah, let's just try. Do we even need the entry ID? I don't think we do. So let's try to call this internal action from the Convex dashboard. Go to functions, go to inventory. Let's go to summarize inventory. I'm going to run this, and let's just see what happens. We should print out the response that we get back. And it did give us some JSON. Go to JS fiddle or something. I'm going to say console log. I'm going to say object is equal to json.parse. I'm going to paste in all of that. How do I run this? Click run. And this is what it looks like. We got health, inventory with some items. So that worked. That's pretty good. And he actually gave us the correct thing. We have a health potion, bronze helmet, bronze sword, health. So let's use that output. And this probably won't work every time. From my experience with OpenAI, one of these times is going to give us some bad JSON and it's going to crash probably. But we're going to assume happy path and that it's all going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to store some of this information inside of the current entry. Okay, so let's go to our schema and let's try to save like, what is our health at this point? This could be like a number. And then also we're going to store what our inventory looks like, which will be a V array of V string. And I'm just going to make them optional for right now because like there's other entries that we don't have. So this will kind of crash without it. Now I think right now these are going to be required, so it might crash since our data doesn't have those defined anywhere. But what we're trying to do is we want to basically update those things. Let's try to like convert the response. I'll say stats is equal to json.parse response. Log that out. And then we want to store that. So how do we store that in the database? Well, we have to create a mutation. So let's just go down here and I'm going to repurpose this one and I'm going to call it store stats into entry. Okay, so we have the entry ID. This thing needs to take in a health and then inventory, the array of each string. And we're going to go ahead and do a patch and make sure that we are patching the health and inventory. Hopefully that's good. And of course, how do you run it? Let's just go ahead and copy this code here. And we are going to pass that information here. So entry ID should be set. We need to get the last entry ID. So I could say like const last entry is equal to entries.length -1. And we're going to say the last entry ID. And then this could be, let's make sure we call the right method. This will be like inventory.store stats. And this will be health. We'll say stats.health. And then we'll say inventory is stats.inventory. Now there are some other places where we kind of need to update, right? So this one expects the health to be defined now. In our case, we'll just set it to 0 or set it to, I think I said 10 is like the default. And then for inventory, I'm gonna give it an empty array. Okay, so we're getting an error because, again, there's like data in our database that's missing the stuff that we need. So I'm actually gonna clear everything out. Anyway, I'm just gonna clear those things out. We're just gonna start fresh, right? We're gonna go back and we're gonna start a new adventure. Click this, and we should get a response from OpenAI soon. We should get an image that is going to display that. And then hopefully we have the inventory stats stored somewhere. Let's go here, click on entries, and we have health is 10 and inventory is empty. Now I would expect that we need to actually call this action because I don't think we're calling it yet, so that I can actually read through the response. Because I think in my inventory I should start with some stuff, right? I should have a helmet and a potion and some other stuff like that. So are we actually calling this? I don't think we even are. Okay, so let's go up here and let's figure out summarize inventory. Do we call that anywhere? We're not. So going back to chat, we could basically run a scheduler here. I could say await context scheduler.run after, and then we're going to go ahead and do something similar where we can say internal .inventory .summarize inventory. And we are going to go ahead and just pass in the entry ID here. Probably also the adventure ID. So I need to go back and I need to add entry ID. And in fact, we have access to the entry ID, so we don't need to do this last entry ID anymore. We actually have it. So let's just go ahead and do that. And I'll say args dot. All right, moment of truth. Let's try to continue on our adventure. And now we'll say start exploring the dungeon. Click submit. Now I will say that it didn't update the entry. So let's go back and try to make sure if I were to look at that particular function that was supposed to update that. Let's go to inventory and then summarize inventory. That printed out health of 10, inventory, a broadsword. So we got the correct response back. And that should have been stored inside the database. So I wonder if maybe we're just not passing something correct. Store stats into entry. Might just put a log here. I'll say args. Let's just see store stats. Light a, I'm going to say light a torch. Let's see what happens. Okay, I light a torch. Looks like I'm in a battle. It's because I have a TypeScript error, and this is not compiling. So like, let's look at this here where this is failing. It says chat TS is failing. Oh, I think I forgot to save my file. Rookie mistake, huh? Forgot to save the file. So I think we should be good now, hopefully. Let's try it again. I'm going to say I rolled a 1. So it says my health points decreased with 7. But I managed to strike back, hitting the enemy, and I roll a 6. I don't know why it keeps rolling for me. I wish it would stop. And we have an error. So at this point, it did respond with some JSON, which I think was not proper JSON. Oh, it's because we're passing the wrong thing. So I told it this is going to be an array of strings, but OpenAI is giving us back objects. So let's go back here. This actually just needs to be string like this. Or the dungeon some more, click submit. All right, finally, we have the health here. I have 3 health left. I guess it just decided to play the entire game for me. It looks like it did. But we also have the inventory here. We have a steel sword, a broadsword, a bronze helmet, a health potion, and a health potion. So I guess during that whole battle, at some point, we found another health potion. Inside, you find a health potion. Okay. What about a steel sword? I found a steel sword somewhere. But at the very least, the health we have, right? The health we can display. So if we have some hearts over here on the right of this image, we could probably get those things displayed. So what we're going to do here is this is a column here. I'll just say flex. And we're going to try to put another thing. I'll wrap this in a div. And then over here, I'll do another div that says like health. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is I want to draw some parts based on the current health, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say new array, and we're going to say last entry.health. And then we're going to go ahead and just map over that. And we don't care about the value of that. We just want to like render out some components here. So let's just find a heart. I'm going to click on this and copy the SVG. I'm going to paste that right there. And I probably need to put an index here. So I'll say key is index. All right, so hopefully we have 3 health. It should be able to figure that out and draw 3 hearts. Now what I should probably also do is give this a class name of like text white so that we can see the hearts. I don't know why that's not showing up. So let's go back. We have health of 3. Is this thing actually being... Oh, it's because I didn't fill, right? So when you do this new array hack, you kind of have to fill it with something. I'm just going to fill it with empty strings. And there we go. So that is our current health. We have 3 left. Now we could potentially make this red. It's because I'm not doing... I need to do text red like 600. There we go. All right, so there we have it. We're kind of getting closer. This is like the initial design I was going for, and this is what we have. It's getting there. It's got some little kinks we got to work out, but I think it'd be cool to try one more adventure and just see how this health thing kind of updates. So I'm gonna start an adventure, and we're gonna start off with 10 hearts. Explore the dungeon. I don't know why I just printed a picture of a forest. I don't think I'm in a forest. I think I'm in a dungeon, but it probably saw which path left or right, and it thought of drawing out a line. But anyway, we have, as you can tell, we have stuff displaying. I kind of wanted to get into a battle. Go left. See if we can get us into a battle. All right, we're in a battle. I'm going to say I rolled a 6. Okay, we got some skeletons that were about to show up, but I rolled the 6 too quick. And I was trying to actually see what happens if they were to hit me and my health goes down. Please enter the number you rolled. I'm going to say I rolled a 1. What is this? 8 Babo? The skeletons managed to land a strike, so I should be down to 9 now. If I go back, I have 9 health. If I count these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so that did update. So I think the very last steps that I want to do is get the inventory displayed. And then I also need to polish this up. I want to make it look nice and then maybe tweak OpenAI to just not be so bad. For some reason, this image is taking forever to generate. So for some reason, it failed to visualize that for some reason. I'm not sure why. But I think when it comes to the inventory, I think we could also use DALL-E to like generate images for the inventory. And I think we could just cache all the images so we don't have to keep on recomputing them. So like here we are getting the inventory from stats, and we could potentially loop through all the inventory items. And if it's something that we haven't seen before, then we could just use DALL-E to generate a new image icon. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another action. Just grab this one. I'm going to put it in this file. I know this is becoming a giant mess, but we're going to try to just use DALL-E again. And we're going to say generate inventory icon. Okay, and this just needs to take in probably a item name, and then also, I think that's it. It just needs to take in an item name. And hopefully what we could do, this needs to be a string, by the way, is we're going to take that item name. I'm going to say args.item name. We're going to generate an image. And then when we get the image URL back, we're going to store that somewhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and say like image URL, and I'll say item name args.item name. And we're going to make another internal thing that we can call, I guess, a mutation. just go ahead and do this. I will say store item image, and that's going to take in an item name, which could be a string, and that will also be a image URL, which will be a v.string. Make sure we call this one, so store item image will be internal inventory dot that. Okay, so basically we're going to run the mutation after we get the image URL. We're going to store that, make sure that we probably want to check to see if we have an item already. So I'm going to say item is equal to context db dot query. We want to search over items. So we don't have an item schema. Let's just make one. I'm going to define a new table called items, and this will have item name and image URL, v.optional, v.string, and we're going to query that. We're going to say filter down, and we want to get the one that has a field of item name equal to args.item name. And then we'll say we'll say first. And then this will tell us like if the item exists. So if it does exist, then we'll have to do something, otherwise we don't. I think if it doesn't exist, then we can just create it, right? So we could just go ahead and like all this. We'll say insert. Make sure it is items, and we want to insert the item name, args.item name, and then also item URL or image URL, args.image URL. Okay, so basically we're caching the images, right? So as we see bronze sword or steel sword, we're just going to use DALL-E to generate the images. And one thing I also want to do is I don't want to waste money generating these images over and over again. So I think what we should probably do is like make sure that we're not going to waste money doing that. I'm going to go ahead and delete all this code. So here we're going to say stats.inventory dot for each, because it is an array, and I'll say item. And then for every item that we have, we could potentially just kick off these actions, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just say like context run. You know, let's do a traditional loop. I'll say for let item of stats.inventory, and then I will run this. And sorry, this is getting complicated, right? So I'm not really doing a good job explaining anything. I'm trying to solve this live for you all. But we're going to go ahead and take the item, which will be the name, so item name, and we're going to go ahead and say run action internal inventory dot generate inventory icon. Okay, and we are going to go ahead and pass in the item name here. And is there anything else that we're missing? Nope, that's it. So we just loop over everything in the inventory and just go ahead and store those. But what I think I'm going to do is I want to short circuit here. I do not want to do this if we already have it. So I'm going to say const item is equal to, we'll have to do a query now. So I'll say context run query. And we'll have to make a method down here. So let's go down here. I will say internal query. Get item by name. Internal query. We'll do item name, and then we're going to basically just do this. Return if the item exists or not. All right, actually, I'll just return the item. Make sure we wait on this. I think I forgot to await over here. Definitely want to do that. Okay, so now we have a query that we can call up here. I'll say internal.inventory.get item by name, and we'll pass in item name, args.item name. And I'm going to say if we have an item already, we can just return. We don't want to do any work if we already have the item. and make sure you await. I think you can also reduce the size of this so it'll be a little bit faster, 256. And yeah, let's just try this out. I'm kind of worried to see what happens. So we are gonna let's just start fresh. I'm gonna clear everything out. We have nothing in items right now. In entries, we have a bunch of things. In adventures, we have 2 adventures going on. Let's clear those out. I'm gonna start a brand new adventure. Click it. I'll say explore the dungeon. Actually, I don't even need to explore. We should have some data that's been inserted already. So if I go to items, we have a bronze sword. I would expected, okay, we're getting a bronze helmet. I think it's because I'm doing it in a await here. Yeah, so it's because I'm doing like that for let whatever. Yeah, so this needs to be a promise all probably. I'll do await promise.all, and then we're gonna go ahead and just like do a map. So just restructure this a little bit so that we can do these all at the same time and not have it be so slow. All right, so the idea was like if I were to, I can use these item names and get the images for those. So going to our UI here, we have to display an inventory somewhere. So underneath this stuff, we could probably just display the inventory. You know, I'm going to do flex. I'm going to wrap this in a flex column there so that we can have the inventory down here, div. And then we're going to go ahead and just loop over every inventory item. So I'll say like last entry dot inventory dot map item name. Actually, no, this will just be item. So this would be item name, and then we need to return an image where the source is going to be something that we don't know yet. So I think for right now, let's just print out item name so we can kind of see that. Put those in curly braces. So we see the items printing out here. This looks pretty good, but we want to actually display the images. Now, we don't have a way to get that lookup table, right? So I think we have to go to our inventory. And do we have a query that returns every item? I don't think we do. So I'm just going to go ahead and make one. I'm going to say const get all items. And that'll just be a query that's public. And we're going to go ahead and just return everything. So let's go ahead and do a query for items. We'll say collect. And we're going to return that. Save that. We should be good to be able to call that in the front end now. So let's go to our front end. And let's go to here. We'll say const items is equal to use query API. We'll say inventory get all items. And hopefully, it's thinking that this thing needs arguments. I don't know why. Didn't need any arguments. Can I pass that null? Or empty object maybe? That should be good enough. So this will be the array that has all of the items in there. And we could basically just look up, like we can convert this to an image like this. And we could basically say if this thing that has an item that matches item name, then we are going to go ahead and display an image. Otherwise, we're going to display a div that says item name. And at this point, I have so much going on. I'm just so lost. Items.find, find the item that matches the item name. Okay, if that's defined, we're going to return an image. Otherwise, we're going to return a div. Okay, and then we're going to close that off, put a parenthesis, close that off, close that off. P will be the index. Get rid of this, and we can actually say source, and we can say items.find item.item name equals item name dot image URL. It's getting pretty crazy. So I'm going to go ahead and say, like, we're going to do this. And we're going to pull that out. And then we're going to make this code a little bit simpler. So I'm going to say if the item is defined like this, and the item has an image URL, then we will display this image. Otherwise, we're going to display the item name. There we have it. We have some items showing up. That's working. Cool. We could also give this a grid calls 3, gap of 4. See what happens if we do that. All right, so we have the items, and let's go ahead and say, like, search around for more items. Let's see if we can maybe have it find an item and, like, display it. I'm gonna say I'm roll a 6. So at this point, I should have, like, 4 health potions. All right, so again, this is like a super prototype, but we have everything, like, being generated. If we actually go back to items over here, they're all displayed there. That's good. And if we were to find a new item, hopefully that will display. I'm going to say explore the dungeon, items other than potions. I just wanted to find a new item that's not a potion. Okay, it looks like it found some leather armor. And at some point, this will update when DALL-E's done and we have the leather armor being displayed. I think also showing the name under the image would be very useful. So I think, like, we did a div here. And then here we could say item name. And this could be a class name of flex column. And probably also text center. All right, so that's what we got. This is the prototype, the mock-up that I was going for, and this is what we have. I will probably spend time now after this just, like, polishing it up. I think this is a lot of good work. I'm just going to go ahead and add everything. I'm going to say using DALL-E to generate images of the inventory, display health, and show adventure image. Okay, go ahead and sync that up. So often when I do these videos, I do them, like, spread out over a couple of days. So I just came back to this project and I loaded up an adventure, and I noticed that all of the images that were previously hosted on OpenAI's image URLs now don't work, right? Those have all been expired. I guess OpenAI only gives you a certain amount of time to actually use those images. So I think it'd be much better to have these images stored directly in Convex. Now, it turns out Convex has the ability to store files inside of their Convex storage. All right, so let's actually try to store them. And when you store a Convex image, you get back a storage ID. So instead of having the URL pointing to OpenAI, we can point to our own storage URL, I think. All right, let's try this out. So it should be pretty straightforward. If we go to the area where basically we create the images, let's just start with inventory. It might be the easiest. Somewhere we generate these images, right? So we have an image URL here. And if we just follow this approach, download the image, convert it to a blob, store it in the Convex, and then we could store that somewhere, that might make our life a little bit easier. So let's just run those and let's hope this works. Get the image URL, get the image, store the blob. So instead of storing the image URL here, which would actually point to the OpenAI image URL, let's try using this await context storage get URL. I haven't tried this before. This is the first time I've made a project using Convex's storage. So hopefully this works pretty fine. I'm going to go ahead and just point the storage ID here. And I'm guessing this could potentially return null if you pass a bad storage ID. So what I'm actually going to do is we're just going to fall back or default to an empty string if this isn't defined. All right, so that should make it happy. Let's just try this out. We might have to start a new adventure to actually try this. So let's just go back to the main page. I'll click start an adventure. And hopefully that should kick off and it should compute the images using DALL-E for our broadsword, bronze helmet, and health potion. Okay, so I think we have these things cached, right? I need to go and actually clear them out. So let's go to data. I forgot we have these and go to all the items. Let's just go ahead and click all these because we want DALL-E to kind of recompute them. I'll delete them all. We're going to try this one more time. I will go back and create an adventure and click that. And that should hopefully recreate those images. All right, there we go. But look at them. Those are pointing to my Convex Rapid Spider 997. Notice I have a URL directly to those images. And I'm actually surprised. That was super easy to get set up and store images in Convex. So very impressed with that user experience. Literally like 4 lines of code and I have the ability to store images directly in Convex. Awesome. So we're going to do the same approach for this prompt that's being generated. So I think I just have to kind of copy this same logic here like this. And let's find out where we do image response. So that's on the visualize page. We're going to go over here and we're going to copy that in again. Actually, let's do that underneath the image URL. And we're going to take the image URL. We're going to get the image data. We'll say image data.blob. We got the image. We're going to store the image here. And then we're going to get a storage ID. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do await context storage get URL, pass it the storage ID. Otherwise, we'll default to an empty string. Okay, so now in the mock-up I did, I have like a dice over here. I want to basically allow a user to click a button. And when they click on this dice button, it's going to roll a 6-sided dice. And it's going to automatically put in a value here that they can submit. So let's try doing that. All right, we got a library called React Dice Roll, which I might actually try grabbing. I don't know when this has been updated or if it's even used 2 years ago. So I guess we'll roll the dice to see if this is even good enough of a library. Go ahead and install that. And while that's installing, yeah, so that's not a good sign. It's already failing, saying that like it needs React 16 and I'm on React 18. I'm going to try to force install it. Probably not the best approach, but if this isn't really maintained, what else can you do? Let's try importing it. And we're going to try to display that on the UI. So let's go to the adventure page. And we're going to import this. And then we're going to display this next to the input. Okay, so we should have an input somewhere on this page. Here we go. And to the left of the input, I'm just going to go ahead and put that dice. And let's hope this thing shows up on our page. Wow, it does. So awesome. What we could do is we can change the size of this thing. And it seems like when it's done rolling, we get the value back. So what we could potentially do is like when this thing is done rolling, I'm just going to set the message as the value interpolated in a string. Technically, you might not even need to do the string interpolation there, but I think value might be a number. It's like a T value. I don't know what that is. So maybe we should do a dot. It looks like we can do value.toString. So that might be a better approach. Okay, so let's see if this works. Click the dice, and then it should, yeah, put a 5 there, put a 4 there. It's just a little big. So we gotta, first of all, let's go ahead and space this out a little bit. On the form itself, we really should probably say class name. We'll say flex gap of 2 or something just to space these things out. And then also we do some height of 10 maybe. And then on the dice itself, let's try to reduce that size. Now I think you can just say size and we could pass it maybe like a 10 and see if that reduces the size of it. Okay, so that's super small. I think this is in pixels, so maybe 40 would be better. There we go. Probably more gap. I would love to have some more gap between these things, maybe like 2 or 4, sorry. There we go. Well, that was easy. So at this point, I think the project is pretty good. I want to polish up this UI because it looks awful. So let's just spend some time trying to add some gap in between some things, and might move this over here because I know my head's going to be hiding some stuff. And let's just kind of format this a little bit. Let's add some gap in between these things and kind of make it look a little bit nicer because right now it's looking pretty rough. For the hearts, maybe we can actually put a grid here. Let's find where we do the hearts. And inside of this, I'm going to say class name. I'll say grid. grid calls 3. Okay, that looks good, but there's like a bunch of vertical space in between these. I'm not a fan of that. Let's just say h of fit. That should hopefully squeeze them close together. And we can also add a little bit gap between these things. So I'll say 2. So here is going to be our health grid. And I kind of wonder if this should maybe be like by the inventory or above the inventory. Let's look at this real quick. So I kind of wonder why this is not expanding to be the full width. I think I need to add on this thing itself, this needs to be a flex grow so that it can expand to be the full width of the thing. I'm not a fan of how these things are kind of spaced out. So if we look at the actual padding, so the hearts, I would like to like have them centered. So if we look at the hearts here, I think maybe we could just put a div here and say like flex and then justify center. I think that's how you can like kind of center those things. I'll move key up to the div. All right, so now they're actually centered on the page. We can make them a little bit bigger too. Okay, I think that looks a little bit nicer. How's that look? Pretty good? All right, so now it's just a matter of like adding gap between the inventory and like your hearts and stuff like that. So let's figure out where this is set up. On this one, I think this div is this whole thing here. So what we could potentially do is say gap of 4, and that should space some things out in between here. Probably put a little space in between this too. Like say gap of 2, or maybe even 4 as well there. The image itself, we could probably round. So like, let's find this image, and we're gonna go ahead and just put a rounded XL on that thing. Okay, so now we got some nice rounded corners there. Same thing with these images down here that we're displaying. So let's add a class name to these. Let's say rounded XL to make those rounded. Kind of peek at these. Are these actually like gapped? These are grid gap 4. So if we have more items, there should be a 4 gap. Those look pretty good. Now adding space between these, it's just too crowded. So let's go back and figure out where that's happening. I'm sure there's a grid somewhere here. Sometimes it's easier just to scroll up to the very top and just do a Command F and type grid. Okay, and here it is. Grid calls 2. Go ahead and put an 8 spacing. Now the approach I like to do is like the bigger components, put a bigger gap, right? Give extra white space in between like larger, like different things on the page. I don't know how to explain it, but like bigger gap here, and then the things inside of this, smaller gap. So like this would probably be like a 4, this could be a 4, and then in between this, potentially you could make this a 2 or something. Just so that things that are like related to each other are closer together. Okay, so now for this, let's try to make this input be full width, and then the button itself, we could probably apply a better styling to it. So on the submit button here, where is it, submit? We'll say class name, rounded XL. We'll say BG is blue of 400 or 500, and then BG blue 400 when you hover. Okay, and then padding X could be 2, padding Y could be 1, hover could be text gray 800. Okay, maybe not that. Maybe we won't touch the text. And you might ask, like, why don't you just use like a component library? I could, and I probably should, but I wanted to keep this as simple as possible and bringing in like shadcn or bringing in some of these other component libraries. Like there's a good one called Daisy UI. Like that could give us some additional styling, but sometimes it's fun just playing around with Tailwind yourself and like making something look custom. Although obviously my styling skills aren't the best. Let's go to input. This thing could be a flex grow, so we make it the full width of the container. And now that I think about this, gap is a little bit too much. I'm gonna go back to gap of 2 here. And I wonder if we even need the height here. Let's just delete the height. Yeah, that wasn't even needed. The button looks a little too rounded. So let's just go back here. I'm gonna say rounded of medium. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now here, remember, put some gap between, I think this needs a gap of 2 or 4. Let's figure out where that's happening. It would be here. We could say gap of 2. That puts a little bit of space there. It looks a little bit better. And for the input itself, we could probably add padding. So let's find the input element and let's just go ahead and say padding of 2. I might even make this a 4. Oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. I need to do the text area. So let's find the text area. I'm sorry, what is this thing? Is this not a text area? I feel like sometimes I get so lost in the actual like HTML that I can't find what I'm looking for. It should be this. Oh, it's a div. That's why it's not text area. So on the div, this is the input. This is the response. We could style this up a little bit. I could put in for input, I could say U, and then on response, I could say DM or dungeon master. Okay, so just so that we know, like this is the dungeon master speaking. Now on this div itself, we could probably say padding of 4, just to give this some more padding. And then I feel like the text could probably be improved a little bit. We're just gonna play around with this. We could do a horizontal rule here and see what happens there. Looks a little bit better. This could be a div, say flex column, gap of 1. Okay. And then same thing over here. We can make this a div. We put an HR there. And let's see how this looks. Okay, not too bad. And then this whole thing, we could give this gap of a 4 so that the space between the dungeon master and you could be much higher. So I'll do like a gap of 8. There we go. Kind of like how this had colons here, you dungeon master. One thing we could also do is look through Google web fonts and try to find a font that would match like a text-based adventure more. Just go here and see if we have anything. Rubik ISO, that one looks pretty good. It might be very hard to read. I don't know, Rubik Burn looks pretty cool. Let's see if this comes up. So when you're using Next, you have the ability to pull in like fonts directly from Google. So if I say Rubik Burned, there we go. And instead of using enter here, I could say Rubik Burned. And then here I could say font, saying that the weight property is missing. So let's just go ahead and say weight 400. Number is not assignable to a string. Let's go ahead and make that a string. Let's see if this works. I'm gonna go over here and hopefully, I'm not sure why the font is not showing up. I figured it would, but I'm not sure. All right, so since we are using Tailwind, it turns out if I comment these out, the font does show up. So I think simply what I'm doing here with just like trying to put it as a class name is not gonna work. I think we should probably like add it as a variable maybe. And we'll say like Rubik Burned. And then what we could potentially do is go back to the docs because I don't know what I'm doing. We'll say variables. So they say font whatever. So we can go back here and say font Rubik Burned. And then in the CSS variable, I'm assuming we could potentially just like style it using this. And then here they do the dot variable here. So let's go ahead and change this to variable. And then inside a global, let's just go ahead and say body, and I'll say font family. And that's going to be var of font Rubik Burned. All right, let's keep our fingers crossed. Does it apply the styling? And it does not. Now, maybe actually what we should do is like, we should do font family here. And we could say Rubik Burned. As you can tell, I don't really mess with fonts too much. I'll say font Rubik Burned. And then that should hopefully give us access to like style these things. This is not working. Let's delete that. And then we are going to go ahead over to the page. And let's try this one more time. We have the div here and we should be able to say font family. Or I'm sorry, font Rubik Burned. Is that gonna? All right, there we go. Been applied. Okay, so that's one way we could do it. Obviously this font is super hard to read, so we should probably go back and maybe find a different font. This font might work as long as like we have the panel not be a background of white. Let's try changing this to just not have a background at all. And we'll change the text color to be white. Okay, that's obviously, that didn't help at all. Let's go back and try to find something else. At least we figured out how to style it properly. This one doesn't look too bad. It kind of looks like a game. Chakra pitch. Let's go and try that one, I guess. Let's say chakra pitch. Place that. I'll just call it chakra. And then we're going to go back to the tailwind. We'll say chakra. Like that. And over here, we'll say font chakra. Yeah, I guess that looks okay. I think the font's just really small, so like we could say font extra large maybe. Or I think it's a text extra large. There we go. And then we could pull this font up higher. So like if we wanted to apply it to everything on this page, I think we could just do this. And then it should start getting applied to various things. Oh, the issue is I have font mono here. That's probably what the issue is. Those look a little bit better. Let's go down to the items. So we'll go to the inventory. Down here I have item name. I'll just go ahead and make this a text of extra large and see what happens. I'm going to apply that to this one too. Text extra large. There we go. Now I think this input is a little bright, so we can go to the input. We could just make the background maybe a little, I will say like background gray. We'll do this and we'll say this is text to white. And then the text here, we'll say text of extra large as well. Keep it consistent. I think the padding here, padding X should be a little bit more. And here we go. Looks good. Now the submit button kind of looks kind of weird. I think if we kept it maybe a monochromatic, it might look a little bit better. So like, again, we could say gray. All right, now for some more polish. So over here, the first entry is always going to be like us priming OpenAI to know what we're doing. So the player shouldn't have to see all this stuff. This is like something that we tell OpenAI. So we should kind of hide the first message. And what we could potentially do is, where do we get the messages? We get the messages from here, entries. And we could potentially either just not show the first input if we're index 0. That seems like an easier approach. So if index 0 is greater than 0, then we'll show the input. There. Now, as far as making these icons, I think it'd be much nicer if the background wasn't just like a bright white, but we could probably tweak that a little bit. So if we go back to where we're generating these inventory icons, let's go and see, where do we pass to OpenAI? It's right here, the prompt. So I'm just going to go ahead and tack on black background. And hopefully this works. And then we could just delete the broadsword real quick. Let's go over the items. Let's go find the broadsword. I'm just going to delete it so that when we kind of restart an adventure, just start a new one. All right, so now it has a dark background. I think giving it an outline of white might look pretty good. Let's go to the inventory. And here is the image. So I might just say like border white. There we go. It doesn't look too bad. So I think if these things were recomputed, it would look pretty fresh. You can even make it like a nice gray color. White might be a little bit much, like 500. There we go. Now, some things you'll notice is that when this first loaded, like it'd be nice if these things had spinners instead of just showing like some text. All right, so Flowbyte, let's just go ahead and grab this and see if this works. I don't know if I have to install Flowbyte to actually make this work, but if I were to just go ahead and put this right here, go ahead and put some class names here. And we're gonna test this out. I'm gonna go ahead and just invert the order of it. That is weird. I don't know why it looks like that. It actually looks pretty cool. It's like a ring that's like spinning. You know, we're gonna go with this. I don't think that's how it's supposed to look. I think you actually are supposed to install Flowbyte, but we're gonna roll with that. I think what we could potentially do is just change the blue, and I'm gonna just make it gray so it's not so like weird looking. I'll make it white actually. Let's just say fill white. See what happens if you do that. You know, I've tried 3 different spinners from 3 different libraries, and they all do this. So I don't know if maybe there's a bug in my page or my Tailwind component. This is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. You know, we'll come back to this later. I don't know. Maybe I need to like change my Tailwind version or there's a bug. But let's just, at the very least, let's just center this. So let's find out where we do this. I'll say text center. Hopefully that centers that stuff. It does not. So let's actually say flex justify center. That didn't do it because I need to do flex column, I think. And that means I need to do item center there. There we go. And then for the width, we should at least do like 20. That's crazy. Let's do the same thing for this image. So when the image is loading, we could potentially copy this whole thing out and like, let's just make it into a spinner component. I'll just say like function spinner is equal to, I'll just have that be returned. Okay. So that should show those spinners. And then also the image. When the image is still loading, we are going to show spinner. And what we're going to do is negate this so we can see what this looks like. Wrap this in a div. All right, so I mean, I think the adventure part's pretty good. I think that page is looking pretty good. Let's move on to this page. I think we can make this look a little bit better and maybe allow the person to select the character that they want to start with. So I'll do like an H1 here. I'll say text of like 4XL, text of white. And of course, let's see if we can just do that same font. I think it was font of Chakra. And I'll just go ahead and say, welcome to the text-based RPG game. Okay, this could probably be a flex column. And then the button down here, just go ahead and make this like a text. I'll say BG gray 500, hover is BG gray 400, padding X of 2, padding Y of 1, and then rounded medium. Okay, we'll do a gap of 8 here. And let's see if we can just like generate 3 images for different characters here. Okay, I'm gonna put like 3 columns. One's for warrior, one's for archer, one's for wizard. Dungeons and Dragons warrior character. Just see what happens there. Dark fantasy. I think this looks more like a warrior. Go ahead and download that one. And then I'll say archer. That looks pretty cool. And then wizard. I don't really like any of these. I might just do one more. And that one looks okay. All right, so I went ahead and added those warrior, wizard, and archer to this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do a grid. And I'll say grid calls 3. And I'll say gap of 8. And we're going to put those 3 images, which we could just say archer. I'll do warrior first, like this. Wizard, archer. And let's see if these show up. Awesome. And then what we could do is you could select one, which would basically outline it. Okay, so let's just go ahead and like add some functionality for that. I'll say const selected character and set selected character is equal to use state. And I'll just go ahead and say warrior will be the first one. Go ahead and import that. And then we will say on all of these, class name is equal to class names. I think I need to import, I'm just going to do this the old fashioned way. I'm going to say if the selected character is equal to warrior, then we will go ahead and say border white. Otherwise, we will say just do an empty string, and then we can simply go through here. This is super like, I'm just in the rapid prototyping stages right now. And let's see what happens. So we should be able to select these. Oh wait, I have to add an on click. So as we click these things, on click, and we will say this will be a function that says set selected character of warrior. We can go ahead and say wizard here, and we can say archer here. Now at this point, there's a lot of duplicate code. We can go ahead and say characters would be like warrior, wizard, archer, and we can go ahead and interpolate a map like this, and we could simply just return this image so we don't have all this like duplicate logic everywhere, and we can just do this. And then make sure you put a key. And this would be, I gotta interpolate this now, so this would be a character .png. Okay, so now we have the selected character. When we create the adventure though, we could probably pass that in here. So let's just go ahead and say like character is equal to selected character. And of course we have to go and update our convex function, which I think is in here. We have a function called setup adventure entries, which was an internal action from create adventure. So this thing, we should probably type it and say we want to take in a character, which is a v.string, like this. And we're going to use that right here. We'll just say args, which we don't have, so I'll say args, and we'll say dot character. Awesome. So now we basically dynamically allowed the user to change who they're starting as. And if this works correctly, if I were to go back and create a new adventure here, let's try archer and click set an adventure. You can see that it actually says that we are an archer. And it shows a picture of us being an archer. Let's just play through one game. Wait, why did I just roll the dice? Okay, there's a little bug. When you actually try to play the game, it like rolls the dice for you. So let's find where I did that dice thing. And I'm going to move that out of the form. I'm going to put it out of the form. And instead, I'm going to say this is a flex of gap 2. And we're going to wrap all the form inside of this. So now I hit enter, explore the dungeon. It shouldn't roll the dice for me. I don't know what this image is. This does not replicate what we're doing. One thing, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put the summary of everything here. I'm going to try to change this up so like the images that it generates are a little bit better. And I'm going to say using the above adventure history, please describe the current scene so that I can use the description to draw a picture. So I'm just going to try putting the history above, and then I'm going to like just ask it to use the above adventure history. Please describe the current scene so that I can use the description to draw a picture. Because right now, like, what is this? This is just not useful at all. I'm going to say, open the door. That looks a little bit better. Okay. So the air grows colder as you descend. A faint sound of shuffling footsteps echoes through the halls. Blah, blah, blah. Roll the dice to determine the outcome of the battle because a group of undead enemies emerge from the darkness. Let's just go ahead and roll a 1. In fact, let's just use the new dice that I have. There we go. I'll do a submit. Oh, I found a new rusty key. That's cool. And I think the adventure is going a little bit better than it did previously. It doesn't seem like it's just playing for me now. Try to open the chest. Ooh, I found a steel sword, huh? I don't know why that one's just stuck. I think DALL-E is confused right now. But it did find a new item and it printed it out for us. Okay, so this is, I think, as far as I'm going to take this project. I could obviously spend more hours, like plenty more hours, polishing this up and trying to make it perfect. But I just wanted to show you how quickly you could build a really awesome, like, potential hackathon submission using Convex, using Convex storage. You saw how easy that was, using the actions to talk to OpenAI. I'm generating images, I'm generating text. So with this, 2 to 3 hour tutorial video, I'm hoping that you all with 2 full weeks can build something actually really awesome. So all of this code I will put somewhere so that if anyone wants to just have a reference point of, like, you want to try to submit a really cool creative AI type of project, you can grab that code, you can play around with it. Now I will say, don't just take my code and like submit it in the hackathon, because obviously I'm not going to let you win if you just take my code. You have to make your own thing. Maybe later on I will come back to this because I think this has potential to make something really cool. But I just wanted to share that with you all. So hopefully I wish you the best of luck at this hackathon. If you guys are serious about contributing, I think it'd be a lot of fun to see what other people build. And remember, we have a Discord channel where if you ever get stuck, you have questions about Convex or questions about OpenAI or questions about like how to make something super interactive, I'm there to help people out. Obviously, I'm not going to like give you too much information so that you feel like there's an unfair advantage during this hackathon, but I'm here to help people if they're stuck with their coding or just stuck with particular small problems with the hackathon submission that they're working towards. All right, that is it. That is the project that I just wanted to share with you all. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Other than that, have a good day and happy coding.